This is why they pay you all the big bucks.
Yes.
All right, good evening, everyone.
I had a beat.
It is
Oh, here's my Italy right here.
just before 7:10
But up from today.
on Tuesday, September 5th. And at this time, I'll call the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. Apologize for anybody joining us on Zoom. We had some technical Wi-Fi issues here at Town Hall. Hopefully they will resolve themselves because they're on my hotspot right now. We have a few announcements and board openings. Not really a few, we have a lot. Our Conservation Commission, we have 2 openings for 3-year terms. Our Council on Aging, we have 1 opening for a 3-year term and 2 associate openings. Our Finance and Advisory Committee, we have 1 associate opening. Our Historic District Commission, 2 openings for a 3-year term and 2 openings for a 2-year term. 1 must be a resident of the Historic District and 1 must be a resident realtor in the town. And then our Human Rights Commission has 1 opening from the Hamilton Housing Authority. And Planning Board has 1 associate opening, and Zoning Board of Appeals has 1 associate opening as well. And now at this time, we have public comment section, 3 minutes on topics not already on the agenda tonight. If you are online, please raise your hand and we'll recognize you. If you're in the room, feel free to come to the podium, state your name and state your business.
Rudolph Pisano. A couple weeks ago, I brought the town's attention to a construction site that was operating at 100 times the state limit for noise. What does that mean, practically speaking? The kids have to come in because it's dangerous. People have to seal off their homes, and they have 3 options. They can stay in the basement, they can leave, or they can stay inside with noise-canceling headphones on. I called the town. Now, if I called Arlington or Belmont or Cambridge or Boston, they all know about the state regs, and they enforce them. But when I called the town, called the police, they had no knowledge of the state regs and really didn't care about them. And I think it's a very sad state of affairs in the town of Hamilton, when you basically have about a dozen people who, we're not talking about a situation that lasted for an hour or a day, it was more than a week. It's a very sad state of affairs that people don't know what this very, very important regulation is. And worse, they don't care. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. Anyone else? All right. We have no consent agenda tonight, so we'll go right on to our agenda. Our first item is discuss and vote on a request for Habitat for Humanity's banner to be hung on the fence at Patton Park. And it is a 4x6 banner, and the info's in your pocket. They asked for, I think, quite a long duration, but I think we've shared with them that it would only be a handful of weeks.
Who? Is that the policy? Do we know what the policy is?
For the Mr. Olson on this
We've
one.
been debating this policy.
Yeah,
Also, there were some up there recently that we didn't vote on.
I agree. The tennis one was,
Yeah, there
we
was,
did not agree with
there were a
that.
multitude up, there were like
That
4 up there
people
the
had
other
put
day
up
when I
there.
drove by.
Yeah.
I thought we were going to focus on future signs on the new structure that was built in front of COA.
You're giving me a look like I'm supposed to know something that I don't know.
Nope, not trying to give anybody a...
So I assume that this is because it is relative to
The project.
the project that's happening here.
Yeah.
I'm also remembering that when the Nordic folk who maintain the trails here wanted one, we did deny that one on the basis of it being promotion.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this is a one-for-one, but I acknowledge there's an inconsistency if we approve this one under the ambiguity of our
Our sign
policy. So I regret that, like, with Nothing Gets Habitat for Humanity, I don't know that I have clarity from the last time we had this conversation when we said no to the Nordic banner.
We had said town organizations is what we had said.
Yeah, we had said, like, celebrating town things or town events, not promoting any company that is doing anything for the town, and Habitat falls, I think, similarly to the
Right,
Nordic.
right. And this is for a gala that they're selling tickets and stuff for, an Oktoberfest gala at the end of the month here.
I'm sure they could get our friends at the community house to post one. But I just wonder if it's
Yeah,
it's unfortunately not within the,
I don't think it's within the four squares of what we've kind of been leaning towards. I mean, I think the other issue, and we've talked about this before, it becomes noise after a while, visual noise, you just don't even look at it. You know, I don't know how many people would see it and actually register, whatever. They might have a better, through social media, you know, if we put it out on
I
our,
mean, two things. I don't think it's a successful place to market. Plus, I don't really want banners all over the tennis courts. I don't think that's a good look. So I think we need to, at some point in the near future, put this back on the agenda and just, once and for all, just put a bylaw there, or a policy that we
Policy,
like.
yeah.
But I thought we had approved the banner on 1A, which is actually a better place for this to go than on the tennis court.
mm-hmm.
For the Nordic one?
Yeah.
I mean, even still, I think it sets a precedent that if somebody can advertise a gala,
Right,
like,
on town property.
it on, like, it's just, it feels like it should only be in promotion
And
of
even though
things.
they're tied to town because they're doing a project, they're not a town entity.
It's not-
Right, I mean, like, Verizon does things in town too,
Right.
right? Like, where's the line in terms of like what can be promoted on, I think it's just a difficult one.
Right, it leans into the advertising a bit, right? Even though it's not promoting their company, but it's funding their organization.
Yep.
Has anybody talked to them? Are they here today? Anybody talked to them specifically?
No, I just told them that's
Part of their major, like, is this part of their major fundraising campaign, or to have this banner on our tennis court?
Yeah, I think it helps raise funds for them to be able to build the housing that they're planning to build there, so it would be specifically for, I don't know that it would be specifically just for the Hamilton project. It's a Habitat, Essex County Habitat.org.
In general,
so.
yeah. What's on the COA banner spot right now?
Nothing.
Nothing?
I think the compromise for me is let them put it on the COA for 2 weeks, and we need to get our bylaw up and running the next couple months.
You're not charged.
I know. Are you charged?
No?
But that would
I
be a
just
compromise
got out
for
of-
me, is that, yeah, we need to get a policy, because it's becoming more and more prevalent, and once again, but we're trying to get banners off of
Right.
the fences and at the park. It's just not,
So then are you proposing a motion to make a compromise and have this be on the COA banner spot for 2 weeks instead of the tennis courts?
correct. I mean, I think, once again, I think we promote Habitat. They're doing great things in this community, so I don't think it should, I don't want to single them out as rejecting, but I think
Yeah.
in fairness and compromise, let them go up there, but we have to get a bylaw going, so we don't have to have this debate. It can be a simple yes or no vote in the future.
Okay. What do you guys
So
think?
moved.
I just don't think, I think I didn't apply the same logic to the other one, and they were doing something good for Hamilton, so we didn't offer them COA, so I
Right.
probably wouldn't, but I think it's a good compromise to put out there. The logic flow doesn't work for me.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think you gotta be consistent, A, and B, you know, once you start justifying it by they do this for this, then where do you draw the line for the next? You know, same with flags, I think, you know, the minute you
Mhm.
kind of move, unless you have a real black and white, if you will, rule. You know, so that's part A. Part B is, I think it's getting busy down there with the community house, the fence, you've got the school, and now we've got the COA. You've got
A lot
a
of
lot of
stuff.
distractions for people to look around and see things. We need to tighten that up.
So then my follow-up is, does Bill's motion die without a second, or do we second it? And
Have they done it before, or, I mean, I haven't,
this is the first time they've asked us for a
Has-
banner.
you know,
I think this is the first time that Habitat's
That's my
asked you for
question. They're not
banners. They
here to
haven't done that
talk,
before.
they're not here to
Yeah.
defend it. I'm not sure if it's a huge part of their advertising campaign, but I can't imagine.
I don't think it's gonna
Right.
break their whole gala if we don't put it on either spot.
I mean, I could follow his logic on, they do a lot of good in housing and such, and to promote that,
I mean,
You know, puts-
here's another kind of an angle on it. To your points, what if we deny it and we say we'll promote it on our Facebook page, our social media, stuff like that? So they still have the outreach, but it's just not cars driving by on 1A? Or is that another slippery slope?
Well, I think I would keep it close to the project, and David, keep me honest with your eyes. So I know they are looking to raise additional funds for the project that's happening here in Hamilton. the long tail of that is that this gala, which is a state gala, not a town gala, obviously,
Right.
can be sort of a, if you're looking for ways to get involved, if we were gonna do that on the town page, but I would keep it very closely tied to, they are looking for additional funds and resources for the project happening in Hamilton. You can donate time, you can donate money, you can go to their annual gala in October and
Yeah.
make that part of the
Yeah,
tiered
yeah, yeah.
messaging. I would just be very careful using the town social media platform to promote private events for companies that are not in some way, part of the town.
I think that's a good
That makes sense to me.
kind of wordsmithing it a bit, so it's just not an advertisement for the gala, it's more of an advertisement to be involved.
So do we just move on?
We move on.
Well, we should,
We gotta deny
we
it.
gotta vote to deny it, so.
The motion fails for second.
Yeah, there's no
Right, Motion
second.
fails for second,
Yeah,
so it's denied,
right.
all right?
Hold on.
Everybody okay with that?
Joe, or you will communicate with him?
I'll reach out to him.
Okay. And we're also gonna put in our agenda in the next month.
Yeah, we're
whatever.
gonna figure this banner thing out.
Banner thing, just be done with it.
If anybody in the audience is a
In-
banner expert, please
And
come back.
just to clarify, is everybody fine with what Caroline said about the social
Yes.
media stuff to kind of
Yes.
wordsmith it, so it's not just
Yes.
about the gala, it's more all-encompassing? All right,
It's a half no.
right, a half no.
Yeah, would we allow them to put something out that just speaks to what they're doing, right here in Hamilton, and go on this website to learn more? And then they could have it on their website, or,
That's part of our
We add an
policy.
announcement section to the town manager report. Hip happenings in Hamilton with Habitat for Humanity. Oh, how's that for alliteration?
Mm-hmm. All right. Up next, we have review and discuss septic loan program article with our Board of Health Chair, David Smith, who's here tonight. Hi, David, welcome. So you've been working with Tom a little bit on this and mostly with your board.
Yes.
Can you just kind of give us all the 5,000-foot view or as close as you want to get with us tonight?
Sure. Okay, that's basically what I intend to do. I thought I'd give you a little overview and share with you the experience of adjoining of neighboring towns that have had this program in place for some time, explain why I think we need the program, and then a little detail on how it actually would work. So what is this called? It is the Community Septic Management Betterment Loan Program. That's a lot of words. And before I really get into this, I want to thank Heather Ford, who's here tonight, for being the inspiration for bringing this to our attention and helping steer it through town government. And also on Zoom, our board member, Dr. Jean Ramsey, I've asked to contribute as well. She couldn't be here in person, but through Zoom, she'll tell you about the experience that we've learned from neighboring towns. So, Community Septic Management Betterment Loan Program, what does that actually mean? It's a program that is authorized by the DEP under 310 CMR 15, and which draws money from the Massachusetts Clean Water Trust to fund septic system repair and replacement projects. It's a loan program that would help our town residents who can't afford the cost that we'll get to in a minute, and also the Hamilton environment, which is impaired by failed septic systems. So I think it's useful to know, we were actually surprised to learn that this program existed in this town back in the 90s and early 2000s. And many residents used it. Well, what happened? Apparently, the state rescinded the original authorizing regulations, 310 CMR 14, and replaced them with 310 CMR 15. All these other neighboring towns made the transition. For whatever reason, we don't know. Hamilton did not. So we're basically reinstating what we had in place in this town years ago. Now, Dr. Ramsey, what I'd like you to do is summarize. Dr. Ramsey invested a lot of time and effort in trying to learn what our neighboring towns were doing with these programs so that we could take advantage of that and not have to reinvent the wheel and go down blind alleys and so on. So, Dr. Ramsey, go ahead.
Thank you, David. And David, I believe members of the board have the chart, right, that we put up with all the different towns that has some details.
That's a good
So
point.
yes, as David suggests, I have had extensive communication with 4 of our neighboring towns who have the program in place, and they've had it for a while: Essex, Ipswich, Manchester, and Rowley. And without exception, all of these towns are extremely satisfied with the program, and probably more important, they note how much the residents in the town appreciate having the program. Some towns may only process a few applications, but we have other towns like Rowley, who's had over 20 plus years of experience, who's processed 115 applications for the loan program. And probably Rowley jumps out at me as the most enthusiastic of all of the towns for this program. No town, by the way, expressed any regret about having the program. In terms of administrative burden, all the towns reported that once the program is up and running, there's actually minimal work required on the part of the staff in the town. So certainly we are fortunate to have the benefit of other towns who have been running this program anywhere from 7 years to 20 plus years. Should we move forward, I suspect they'll be of assistance then. And so that's the general points that I would like to make tonight. And I do want to say thank you to the select board for your interest in this program. David, to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ramsey.
Thank you.
She mentioned something I want to just point out. In your package, there should be 3
Right.
items. One is this one-page summary sheet of the program itself. The second is the spreadsheet that Dr. Ramsey referenced. That's the selected information by town that she was able to compile. And then the third is this frequently asked questions for the Community Septic Management Betterment Loan Program. So those are 3 key documents that I think will help answer questions you might have, give you some kind of a little more of the nuts and bolts of the program. So, next, do we really need this program? I'd like Heather to start that discussion by answering the question from her perspective with the Hamilton Foundation.
Hi, Heather.
Good evening, all. So I want to just be clear on, because I spoke here maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago on this program, so I'll just be quick about it. But the Hamilton Foundation often bumps into people who are having some issues with their bills, and if they get a $30,000 or $40,000 bill to repair or replace their septic system, oftentimes they don't know where to turn. They then come to us, and to date, we haven't really been able to direct them anyplace concrete. So that's why we teamed up with the Board of Health to try to move it forward. But I want to be clear that there's a lot of people in town, besides the people that would come to the Hamilton Foundation, that will also benefit from this program. So it's not just people that would come through that program.
Okay, thank you, Heather. And also, our board has received several inquiries a year from residents who are looking for help with that expensive bill for the replacement of their system. So, good point. How many are there? What does it cost? Our septic inspector is a key player in this program. It's his estimation that in a typical year, anywhere from, let me back up. There are 2,800 residences, homes in this town, and every single one of them has to have a septic system. In any given year, somewhere between 15, 20, even as many as 25 septic systems fail a Title V inspection. And when that happens, they have to be repaired or replaced, and repaired or replaced in conformance with Title V requirements. If you ask a person who's gone through that process, they're going to tell you replacing a septic system in this town for a typical home is $30,000 or $40,000. It can be higher, $50,000 even, in difficult circumstances. But 30 to 40, I don't know many people who have $30,000 or $40,000 lying around waiting for something to do with it. That's a big chunk of money, and it presents a hurdle, a real burden to a lot of people. So there is definitely a need. And as I mentioned, when this program was in place years ago in town, there were at least 4 residents in a given year who had loans that they had gotten from the town through this program in its original incarnation. So that's the need. How would it work? In order to have this program in place in Hamilton, we need a 2/3 vote at town meeting, whether it's special or annual, the regular town meeting. 2/3 vote on a warrant article, and Tom has kindly drafted the warrant article. I've looked at it. It looks fine to me. We're going to have to fine tune it, but that's the item that would appear on the warrant that would enable this program. Once the program is approved at town meeting, presuming it is, then the process just starts. We would, it requires some Board of Health staff. Our finance director and treasurer would be involved. And the town, look at it this way, the town is really a middleman between the state and the Clean Water Trust and a homeowner. And you just need, the state has all the forms that you fill out to go to the state to get the state to put aside a bucket of money for the town of Hamilton from the Clean Water Trust. And then the town draws from that as an application comes into the Board of Health. It's reviewed, it's approved. And remember, this isn't, just some fly-by-night thing. Our septic inspector is the person who probably issued the notice of failure of the system, who would review and approve the design of the new system to replace the failed one, and who would inspect the system in the course of construction of it and issue the final certificate of approval for the system to operate. So we're intimately involved in the process now, even without this loan program. But the loan program just simply provides a homeowner who applies the ability to pay for it without bankrupting them. All right. Along the way here, we've met with the town manager to describe this. He's on board with it. We met with John McGrath and FinCom, and John provided us some excellent feedback and suggestions for how to get this program on the warrant. We've met with our treasurer and our finance director. We're now meeting with the select board. Town council's been involved, so I think we've covered all the bases that we have to in order for this program to be accepted and embraced by the town. So that's about where we stand right now, and let's see, we're hoping, I want to end this with just one example. In the course of developing this program, it was maybe 2 months ago, I was chatting with one of my neighbors who had to replace their septic system. And this is a typical example. An ancient silver maple in their backyard had a root network that just simply destroyed the infiltration system in their septic system. They had to have it dug out, create a new that hole in the ground, install the new system, and so on. And they had to take out a home equity loan in order to pay for that. And anybody who's going through the home equity loan process, that's a hassle. It's kind of, it's nerve-wracking, takes a lot of time. The advantage of this loan program is that it would eliminate a lot of that hassle, that uncertainty. I mean, how do you know you're going to get it approved? And so I described what we were up to, and she said to me, would you please make sure I know when this town meeting is scheduled with this warrant article on it so I can come and vote in favor of it? Because I would dearly have liked to have had that in place when I had to replace my septic system. So that's just one testimonial in favor of having this program, and I'm sure there's many more. So that's it. Thank you.
David.
Thank you, David.
Any questions for David or any of the folks that worked on it?
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at you talked about the towns around us, but the applications have been less than 6, right? So it gets used, but it's not a big burden on the town. There's like, it looks like it's 1 to 2 per year, 2 to 3 in Ipswich, 4 to 7 in Manchester, 4 to 6 in Raleigh. So it's probably gonna get used, but it's not a huge, I mean, I like the idea that it's an insurance policy for people that might not do it, they might ignore it, but I just didn't know what it creates burden it creates for, like, what department now Joe would have to run this sort of process?
The finance department, Wendy's been in touch with David and her counterparts in Ipswich and other towns. She doesn't feel like it'll be, I'll let Wendy speak for herself, but. From what she's told me, she doesn't think that this is gonna be an onerous burden for their department. It's only a couple of applications a year. Once they're processed, it's just a matter of collecting the loan repayment every year, making sure.
And the loan's guaranteed through the value of the property, right? Eventually, they can't sell the property without
Yeah,
repaying
so
the loan.
it winds up going on their title until the loan's repaid, so
Right.
that if something happens, we can always lien the property to get back the money that, the only risk for the town is that if somebody does default, we're on the hook to pay the state back, but the risk is actually minimal because we can always lien the property and get it back that way, so.
I mean, my question to you is, you probably don't know the stats for this, but I mean, people don't test their septic until they go sell their house. So if everybody in town went and test their septic right now, what percentage would fail? Just because they don't want to test it, because they don't want to pay to fix it? I mean, do you have statistics that would show us, like, it's a lot of people ignore this because they don't want to get the bill for $30,000?
That's an interesting question, Bill. What our septic inspector tells me is that, in any given year, it could be as few as 15, it could be as many as 20, or even 25 systems fail. And why do they fail? Well, in some, surprisingly, I know what you're thinking, and it's, let's face it, every time someone goes to sell their house, one of the first things they do is have their septic system inspected and see if it's going to pass, because that's a big factor in the ease of the transaction to sell the house. So, there are other indicators that trigger an inspection, and one of them is, for example, if you have a septic contractor have to pump your system 4 times a year or more, it's an automatic candidate for failure, and the inspector has to
Interesting, okay.
determine that, and it almost invariably means it's failed. When your system backs up, when you flush the toilet and it doesn't go anywhere, it's probably because a tree in your backyard has a root network that's invaded the infiltration field and blocked the pipe that runs from the holding tank into the infiltration field. That's a failure. So, and I know there's some instances where odors have been noticeable, and those are indicators of a failure in the septic system. So there are at least some we know that are failed, having nothing to do with the property being put up for sale.
I think anything promotes, I think it's a system people ignore, right? So anything that promotes people not ignoring it is probably a good thing for the town and our water.
No, I think it's a great benefit.
Yeah.
I had your same concerns. I read through the chart too. There's not a lot, but I didn't even think of that. I mean, it's a good way to defer payment and get something done now if you wanted to. And you mentioned a few things I didn't even think of, the roots into the lines. Who requires those? Who decides those requirements that make it eligible? Is that us as a town, or the state has predefined?
Well, that's a good question. We the town, our town government decides on what the eligibility criteria are. Once the program is approved, presuming it is, then we can sit down and set up whatever criteria we want. The one that seems to pop up most often is this. What about a homeowner who has decided to sell their house and then they're going to move to Florida, Why should we support them with a loan when all they're going to do is leave town? Some towns do have one exemption or one exception for an approval, and that is if you're selling your house, then they won't process the loan. There's a flip side to that too. You could say, well, all right, if that's what you want, then we're going to impose an extra charge for processing the loan to compensate for the fact that you're not going to be here to see that loan paid off through its life. That's one possibility. There's another question I'm surprised you haven't asked. How many defaults have there been?
I saw in the
It said
packet, it
zero.
said
And the
there was
answer's none.
Yeah.
Right.
I read that.
I mean, I was amazed to learn that, but that's
If
true.
they sell the house, they pay off the loan.
Right, you pay
You-
it off of the sale.
when-
But what happens if, you know, I did this today, then I got an equity line, then I did other things because I didn't have to pay for septic.
But it's always
All
on
of a sudden, I
the,
don't have the
it's always on the title, though, so it's always, it follows
Hey,
the
go-
banks.
Yeah, but what's the order of pay?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, well, it won't transfer, I get it, but
The town goes to the deeds
where in line
office.
would we be?
The town goes to the deeds office, puts a lien on the property for the amount of the loan.
Right.
So, and we have first recourse to the proceeds from sale if that happens. But the sale has to, what's the term, extinguish the loan when a transaction occurs, when the property changes hands, that extinguishes the loan immediately and it's due right then and there. And so you take the proceed, that comes out of the proceeds of the sale.
Right. So let me ask this question. So, good conversation. So today, we're just deciding if we want to,
Well, you've already put it on the
We've
warrant.
already got it on the warrant.
already got
I
it on
just
the
wanted
warrant. It's
David to come in and
already
give us a little more
We're gonna vote
details
on
about
it.
it.
Yeah,
This
we
is
stand.
more-
I don't know if
I don't know what the
that's-
goal of tonight is. I always like. to
Goal
know
is
the
just
Educate us.
informative and educate us so
Yeah.
that when we
What-
do, we can make an informed
Yeah.
decision when we make a recommendation to the warrant.
Exactly. Tom, I'm sorry. Bill, when the
Yeah,
time
warrant
comes.
without a set guidelines. The guidelines can come later.
Right.
Okay.
There'll be a warrant article, though, that'll outline the acceptance of the state statute and that the program will run through the town finance department.
Who keeps the interest?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Who keeps the interest?
Oh, the interest. First of all, the state does charge an interest. And up until last year, it was 0%.
Right.
More, in the past year, it's gone up to like 1 or 1.5%, 2%, something like that. Then the town is free to add to that whatever it wants.
Thank you.
And so we're free to set a processing fee for accepting and approving the application, and also decide how many percent above and beyond what the state charges us to charge the homeowner for the loan.
Right, because if I'm looking in your chart here that
2
you
to
made
4, yes, 2
with
to
the
4,
other ones
yeah.
you've got for application fees, it seems like
Only Ipswich.
I would turn their heads sideways.
three of the towns don't charge an application fee,
Right.
but the one town charges kind of like I'll call it a processing fee, for lack of a better word here, because it's talking about registry of deeds, and what they have to pay the registry of deeds is $105, but then I think it's Ipswich charges
Yeah.
$600 or $800 depending on, $810 for the application fee and the recording fee at the registry of deeds for their kind of time and processing.
Then you have, I mean, Essex, Manchester, and Raleigh, if it was set at 1.5%, are making 2.5% on these loans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting.
But
we
you
wouldn't
haven't
make money
figured
off
out
of
what-
septic systems.
What Hamilton's gonna do.
No, I think that's going to be a joint venture amongst FinCom, our finance director, treasurer, this board, to decide what those numbers are going to be. So we don't have to set those numbers when the article goes into the warrant for vote. That's our discretion. After the vote approves the program, we hope.
So whatever the trust borrowing rate is, I think it is 2. Who's
2%.
paying that, whatever, us, on the number of loans that are out there and the value times 2%, monthly, annually, whatever it is, or is the resident doing that? How's the town must
You'd
The
way
pass that through. You'd pass that.
pass it through monthly, so
Whatever
that's something
state,
finance.
whatever the state's going to do, you pass that through to the resident, and then the question is, do you want to add a percent for the town to collect for processing and managing the loan?
Yeah.
That,
The state requires you keep a separate bank account, I'll call it, for those funds that come in and then that go out to the homeowner and then that come back from the homeowner to repay the loan. And so you decide how much of a difference you want between what you're going to pay the state in interest on the loan and what you charge the homeowner for interest, and the difference we keep.
They just go in the general fund.
Yes.
I had a question. If it got voted in, how often do we have to vote on it? Does it sunset after a certain amount of time, or is it 10 years, or is it?
It's indefinite.
Yeah,
Indefinite.
I think the only reason it sunsetted
voted
last time
off.
was because the section of law changed.
They changed it.
And so
And
we
we
weren't
just let it drop
able to
for
use
some
it anymore. The town, nobody in the town ever picked it up to reauthorize it.
Yeah. But I mean, from what Heather's said and her experience and what we've found in our experience, I think there's probably 3 or 4 homeowners per year who probably would want to take advantage of this program. And it's nice to be able to, it's nice to be able to help residents in the town who want to, most of them want to stay here and stay living in their home.
Right.
And it's good for the environment.
Well, that's, right, yeah,
Okay.
no, it's a way to, it's insurance policy for us, right, so.
Seems
Well,
all good
David,
to
you bring
me.
us very good, Dave, I appreciate all the research you do to bring us a good program, so thank
Yeah,
you.
okay.
Thank you, David. All right, good information. All right, up next, we have,
Any questions?
yeah, any questions from audience or Zoom folks on that? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Up next, we have discussed the request from the planning board to reopen the special town meeting warrant to add an article for an amended stormwater management bylaw, and we have Marnie Crouch, the planning board chair, with us tonight to discuss.
Yes, thank you for making time to hear from me. I attempted to join your meeting, your last meeting, and I think there was some difficulties at that meeting, but that's beside the point. I think everyone in town is probably a little bit aware of some of the stormwater runoff on Bridge Street from the lots that are under construction there. I was made aware of some video showing flooding of Bridge Street. And that's of significant concern if the wetlands or the Miles River were to be affected. And so, just by way of background, the Planning Board has been considering amendments to Chapter 29 of the general bylaw regarding stormwater management for quite some time, and it goes back to the spring of 2022. But given the significant rainfall that we've received and the progress we've made toward finalizing the proposed amendments that have been brought before the board by Town Council Alex Weshert and Pat Norton, we believe that we could get amendments to the bylaw before town meeting in November. We're quite close. So by way of background, the seminary sold approximately 19 acres along Bridge Street and a small portion of Miles River Road to an entity called Bridge Street Property Distribution Conduit, LLC. And that entity subsequently sold the property to the entire 19 acres to another LLC called SRJM Realty, LLC. But the planning board only had applications from another entity, I believe affiliated with SRJM, called Summit Real Estate Strategies, LLC. And that entity initially filed an A&R request, which the planning board granted, and subsequently that entity came before the planning board with respect to Lot 1. And the information I passed out to you shows the ownership of the different lots. But so Summit had a stormwater management permit application before the planning board, and it engendered a number of questions from board members. And one of the questions was, why shouldn't there be a stormwater management plan for all 9 lots? Because the lots themselves are rather small, and the houses will be relatively close together, and there are quite steep slopes there, and it would make sense to look at that property as a whole. And subsequently, the Summit Real Estate Strategies, when they were informed that they needed to make some amendments to their application based on the comments of the town's peer reviewer, they went back and ascertained that they had actually disturbed land less than an acre, so they withdrew their permit application. Now, that's all well and good, but our bylaw did provide, it had reference to a common plan of development or sale. And if you look at the chart that I provided, where SRJM was the initial transferee and still owns 5 of the 9 lots, I believe I'm correct in that number, 1, 2, 3, 6 of the 9 lots, one could argue, we never determined, that there was a common plan of development or sale with respect to that property. But we were hampered by a loophole in the stormwater management bylaw. And I know, Mr. Olson, at the last meeting you said, is it a bad bylaw or is it a bad developer? And I would say we don't really have to answer that question, because oftentimes it's not that it's a bad bylaw, it's just you don't discover the hole in the bylaw until you have a circumstance in front of you where if you wanted to go apply it, you would realize that there actually was no definition of what would constitute a common plan of development or sale in the bylaw, and also no meaningful enforcement provisions. So even if we had said, okay, there is a common plan of development or sale, it would have been extremely fraught to attempt to enforce the bylaw with respect to the entity, probably SRJM. So at that point, the planning board started to look at how we could improve our bylaws, and we went through an exercise of looking at other town bylaws, and I believe Ipswich is certainly one of them. And the town manager authorized us to engage Alex Wescher to help us draft the requisite language. And so we've made substantial progress. And Pat Norton, who's an engineer and I think is a significant employee at New England Biolabs, worked with Alex to make sure that we're going to get a bylaw that addresses issues going forward. And not only the issues on Bridge Street, but as we all know, the amount of land that's available in Hamilton for development now is not necessarily flat and easy to develop. That property is often not available, and we're finding that there's more development on land with steep slopes that require more care and how they're treated. So unless you have some questions for me, I would like Pat Norton to actually address the actual specifics of the language that's being proposed. I will note that the planning board has yet to finalize the proposed amendments that Pat and Alex have put forward, but I think we can do that in one meeting, and then Alex could assist us in making sure that we give the requisite statutory notice, so that we can get an article on the warrant and have the required notice so that it can be discussed and voted on at town meeting. And the object really of this bylaw is to make sure that there is environmentally sensitive site design and problems are avoided. And we're proactive in requiring construction that will safeguard our wetlands and our rivers from stormwater management, instead of trying to play catch-up when we see with the torrential rain that Bridge Street is flooded and water is streaming toward the wetland and toward the Miles River.
Just before I just did have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Before we went to bed. But in terms of the process, right, so 100% appreciate the process, and I think it needs to be done because what happened shouldn't happen again, right? So, but my question is in terms of process, like, we have not been successful in town, or we sort of, I'm going to use the term rush a bylaw to vote, right? It has very, very little success. Maybe the second or third time it passes, but never the first time when we sort of get the appearance we're rushing something. So I'm just trying to figure out, like, I know we want to get it in place before we have other permanent properties, but is November really, if to walk through the timeline, but I just don't see we have enough time to really get public involvement and build consensus. So that's the only thing I'm concerned about. I agree that it needs to be done, and I applaud the group for doing it. I'm glad you came in and talked to us about it, because I think we could have input in what you guys do too, but I'm more concerned about the two things, right? Let's talk about the bylaw, I think it's important, but the timeline.
Well, I can tell you that the planning board has had the amendments to Chapter 29 on its agenda multiple times since last spring. So we did spend a considerable amount of time, obviously, on the Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary Reuse Initiative. But we have been working on this, and obviously all our meetings are open to the public. So I know it's a question for you, and you'll have to make that analysis. But what I understand from Alex is that if this if the amendments were to pass at town meeting, after the Attorney General were to approve it, then the revised bylaw would apply to any land disturbance activities on Bridge Street if they had not been commenced. So it would be protective of the lots where there is no construction activity, but where there are really significant steep slopes and the potential for a lot of runoff if we don't act proactively. And I know the Conservation Commission has issued orders of conditions with respect to 2 of the lots, but there's no building on those lots yet. So that's the reason for, I don't want to use the word haste, because we have not been hasty, and you've seen the red line copy that's been in circulation. But that's the reason for going forward in November, if at all possible.
What, George, walk us through the timeline that you see. We have how many meetings between now, and how many meetings the planning board have between now and?
I think the chair is probably right that, statutorily, they have enough time to meet the requirement to complete the bylaw and have a public hearing on it. I understand your concern. The board's been very consistent in the last 2 years about wanting to make sure that there's a full and public engagement, which doesn't necessarily translate to just meeting the statutory requirement. I will say that I also agree with the planning board chair and the board in that the situation on Bridge Street would be great to have another tool in our toolbox to be able to make sure that when the remaining lots get opened up for development, that we have a way to make sure that what's happened there doesn't continue to happen going forward.
And I guess those lots aren't grandfathered in because they've already...
I don't believe so, and I asked that question of Alex Weshart specifically. I asked him when the effective date would be, and so if construction activities haven't taken place, then this new land disturbance review procedure would kick in, and then...
That shovel in the ground or building permit?
I think that mentions building permit.
I think it always starts with building. It almost always starts with a building permit.
Right.
The other thing I'd say is, I agree with the chair and with council in that they pursued this without a common plan of land, so they can't come back now and argue that, well, we already started working on the
Right.
site, so we're grandfathered in. I don't think that would
They're looking
hold
at
up.
each lot
I would definitely argue
individually, right?
against
So-
that.
Yeah. And I guess my other thing is, typically when we propose a bylaw, it gets passed at town meeting, and then the AG's got to take a look at it.
3 to 6 months.
It's 3 to 6 months. So
So,
let's say that it passes,
yeah.
and lot
7.
7 starts construction 2 months after town meeting.
If the AG hasn't approved
isn't
it, they're in the
until-
The AG
clear.
hasn't approved
No,
it,
I mean,
right?
They're in the clear.
It's 9 months away.
Pending,
Right.
Yeah.
right.
So they're still going to be under the old bylaw because the new bylaw doesn't.
But we're
Right.
not, but once again, we're not.
But the more you push this off for town meeting
We're
approval,
gonna create a
the more you
bylaw,
push that off.
Right.
bylaw just for 9 lots, right? I mean, we're also
Right.
gotta acknowledge that, right? But, Tom, what is the vote for this at town meeting?
2/3.
2/3.
Well, actually,
Right.
in my opinion, this one would be a majority vote because it's a general bylaw amendment.
Oh, it's not a zoning, or
That's correct, it's not a
Right.
zoning bylaw amendment, so.
it might be
unless
simple
the town
majority.
has any specific public.
Tom, would you mind just, I'm sorry to bother you,
Oh,
but
sorry,
just
Tom.
so it's all on the up and up, I guess.
Yes, thank you. So this would be a general bylaw amendment, so unlike a zoning bylaw amendment, which requires a planning board hearing and a planning board recommendation in order for town meeting to take action, that is not the case with respect to a general bylaw amendment. So unless there was some local bylaw or other requirement that the town had in place that the planning board would have to weigh, they certainly could weigh in on it, and it makes sense for them to weigh in on it, but from a statutory perspective, this is not a bylaw amendment under Chapter 48, Section 5, so there's no planning board hearing requirement by statute.
Gotcha.
And there also would not be, unlike a zoning bylaw, which would be effective upon the date of the town meeting vote, assuming it gets approved by the Attorney General's office, for a general bylaw amendment, it's not effective until it goes through the AG's approval process, and then the town posts the bylaw, and that's when it becomes effective.
Right, and I will add that although we're making important and significant changes to the bylaw, we're not rewriting the whole thing. So as you can see from the red line
Right, there's not that
copy.
much that's really struck from it or changed. It's just that
And
one
what-
section.
What is the, just because I want to talk about the bylaw next and not necessarily Bridge Street, but what is, just so I understand it, Richie, what is the range of slope on that property between what and what percent? If you had
Well,
to-
I don't think it's 2 to 1 in all places, but it sure looks like it is when you
Yeah,
drive
I'm just curious.
by.
Percentage-wise?
Jonathan Poor is a planning board member, and he's much more informed about these kinds of slopes because it's within the purview of his business. But do you have any notion of?
To give a range of percentage or so, because the bylaw refers to percentages, right? So I'm trying to figure out where this falls.
Yeah, there are portions of lots that are 2 to 1 or in excess of 2 to 1, but most of the site approaches 2 to 1. So, but the dominant slopes are just below 2 to 1, so.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Pat, do you want to make a few comments about the process that you and Alex went through?
So yeah, Pat Norton, also a member of the planning board, and as Marnie said, I did have a hand in helping Alex in the process. She did a great job of explaining why we're doing this. The what is in the red line copy, and I can go through that in detail, or I can answer questions. I don't know, I can just summarize some of the changes if that's helpful.
Maybe summarize some of the changes just for the folks I'm not getting too much in the weeds.
Sure,
And we
yep.
can follow up if we want to get in the weeds.
No, that's
for you.
easy. Marnie described a lot of language around the common plan development, so we shored up that definition in the bylaw. A lot of time was talking about that and the amount of disturbed land and how that applies to individual lots versus taking a look at the whole. I will say that we've kind of, our ability to treat water on that site has been somewhat minimized by the fact that some of those developments are already in construction, obviously, so we can only really combine the lots remaining and look at that as one system when we apply this new bylaw, but that's no reason not to do it. We can talk about geometry and the definition of slope, but that's in there and it's pretty clear. It's maybe the consideration is only over the disturbed land, so you can't take advantage of the average over a big lot when you're talking about land that's not disturbed, so that's a nice clarification that we made there. The section about applicability, that's applying the slope now, and you'll see the ranges of what triggers different levels of permitting as far as like an administrative land permit or a disturbed land permit, and that talks to the amount of area and the slope that you're disturbing. So anything obviously less than that 1 acre Marnie described that would otherwise trigger the full authority of the stormwater management handbook and everything else. Those are the in-betweens, basically, and what we could apply to help treat water on any construction site or disturbed land. Section 5. We made a better reference and made sure it was clear on the regs and requirements under the Massachusetts Stormwater Handbook, which, of course, would apply to this bylaw, and then shored up Section 12, which refers to the enforcement on what happens if you don't pay attention to the requirements in the updated bylaw. And then outside of that, it's also, then we're making changes and updating for consistency, the rules and regulations. So that's basically just describing the permitting process, and it would be nice to create forms, which makes it clear for the applicant then the types of information that you're asking for as part of the process, so it makes it easier to assess when they come before the board. But that's a quick summary of the work.
Questions for Pat and Marnie? I guess I'll start off with another question, since we're talking about kind of timeline and process. Has the planning board voted to approve this change at the moment? Are you still working on it? Where are we in that part of the process?
We probably have, well, it's on our agenda for the next meeting. It's the priority at the next meeting, and I'm hoping that we can finalize it at the next meeting. So we have, that's not the sole topic under discussion at the next meeting, but we will spend at least 2 hours or more on that. And there are just some, I have a couple of questions for Alex, some maybe a little more robust language in the enforcement section with a specific reference to the common plan or development or sale there, so there's absolutely no ambiguity. But other than that, Alex has been really instrumental in helping us get this bylaw to where it is now. I mean, he has a lot of expertise in this area, and obviously, he's with KP Law, and we all think highly of that firm. So I think we're in good shape. And then once the general bylaw is amended, we can address the rules and regulations. And right now, there's inconsistency in the definitions between the bylaw and the rules and regulations. But we can amend the rules and regulations with just public hearings. That they can. There's no need to have them approved at town meeting. That's just the subject of a public hearing. So there's no urgency in getting the rules and regulations finalized at this point in time. But we thought that given the significant rainfall that we've had this summer, unlike last summer where we had none, it seemed to be imperative to get the situation on Bridge Street addressed, and also, provide a good, solid bylaw for other sites in town that might have steep slopes and the potential for runoff.
I mean, once again, I'd say I applaud it. I know it's hard to rewrite a bylaw or a guideline or a regulation, so I applaud the hard work you did. And I've listened to the other projects in town. We have talked about slope, so you guys are being consistent with your concern with slope. I just had 3 sort of general questions just so as we put it together. But so who has a good bylaw? What town around us sort of have you modeled it after anybody? Have you talked to other, like, who has a good bylaw that's been enforceable, that's done a good job for slope?
Is Pat still here?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, I think we looked at Ipswich, didn't you?
Yeah, Ipswich has an example of a development where this was applied on Linebrook, that common plan development. So, bunch of homes built into a slope, and they cut a drive that they share inside, and they dealt with different ways of how to treat stormwater runoff from that project.
That
That's a good
project is
example.
near Marini Farm.
Yeah, I know right
Just-
where you're talking about, I think.
I think if you're to look at an application and a reference, that's probably the best one I can think of.
But we did look at a number of towns, and I know Middleton has a separate bylaw just addressing steep slopes. So, there was a lot more that we could potentially do, but we started here. And we did, as I said, look at a number of towns. But Ipswich seemed to have good provisions in their bylaw. And some towns were just very amorphous. I mean, you just need a stormwater permit if you're going to disturb the land, and they don't even attempt to define how much. So we've kind of kept to the original construct, but just tried to improve it significantly.
Does it limit properties from being developed, or it just says you have to have a plan to do it, and there's always a plan to do it? I just wonder, are we taking away anybody's ability to develop a property with the bylaw, or we're just...
The intention is to have the development that's environmentally sensitive at the outset, that looks at the issues of stormwater management in conjunction with wastewater treatment, and views the site holistically so that the benefits of conservation are respected and the environment adjacent to the property is protected from any potential pollutants. So it should not in any way limit development. It just should encourage good development.
Okay.
So more responsible, less restrictive.
Yeah. I think you're right.
But
Right, 'cause we passed that conservation bylaw at the last meeting. The night before the meeting, I got calls from, a million developers telling me it was a bad bylaw. So I just don't want to in a situation where, so my question is, to be proactive, are you involving a developer in your discussion? Do you invite developers to your meetings to have a good, robust discussion about what are the pros and cons, just not to change it for them, but just to get their opinion of what we're suggesting?
Well, we haven't done that, but certainly when we go to the statutorily required public notice, we could reach out to developers like Tom Ford and some other
I think it would be
developers in town to see how they react to that. But again, it is in large measure modeled on Ipswich, so it shouldn't be unfamiliar to local developers or an enormous surprise to them.
Do you mind if I just add
Oh, sure.
something to that?
Oh, please.
So I can speak, to dropping my phone. I can speak to the developer side of the process because that's work that I do.
Okay.
So not a developer, but I develop steep slopes. So there are many, many ways to develop steep slopes in environmentally sensitive ways and stable ways, not just during the construction, but for final design and sustainability once you've completed the design. And usually it doesn't even cost any more money, it's just better thinking. So it's not something that in any way limits the developability of the site. It just requires better planning. And like I say, not even necessarily more cost or effort. Oftentimes, it's just a simple matter of terracing instead of moving the steep slopes around.
Right.
It's that simple. So the other thing that I'd just like to mention is that you mentioned what other towns have good, solid stormwater management or especially steep slope bylaws. Marnie brought up the fact that most of these towns, well, specifically Hamilton's in a situation where we've sort of developed all of our easy-to-develop land, of all of our flat land, and now we're into the harder-to-develop land. All the other towns are in the same position. So steep slopes are kind of, in a sense, a frontier. They're not a frontier in places like Pennsylvania where they have less stable hillside conditions. Hamilton and the North Shore has more ledgy conditions, so it's not as critical, but we're getting to the point where there's a critical mass. I have on my phone some pretty disturbing videos that are clear state bylaw violations from Bridge Street that really should require stop work orders, but I don't know whether there's anybody paying attention to it. So this is a fairly serious issue, and it will continue to become a serious issue as more sites in Hamilton get developed that are on more challenging sites. And it'll be difficult for other towns as well, but it's a frontier.
That's all. Could I add to that last piece?
Thanks.
Mr. Porter, with all due respect, just so you know, and for the edification of anybody watching it and listening at home, we're definitely watching and paying attention, trying to balance the sites are open, and if we stop work order, then the conditions.
I'm not promoting a stop work order. I'm just saying there are.
But I don't want people to hear it at home. Something we should be doing.
I understand.
We're trying to balance. If we issue a stop work order, then the site stays the way it is until it gets.
I understand.
It'll continue to contribute.
I merely.
In the area. So we're working with the developer. He's been in our office several times telling us what he's trying to do. He's been very responsive when we got him to pay attention to it. And we're hiring a consultant to give us other ideas so to make sure this doesn't happen again on those lots. So
Excellent.
we are
Yes.
trying to address it. We are paying attention.
So
Fortunately-
I'm not here to promote a stop work order. I'm just saying that there currently are ongoing violations during rain events. That's all.
Right, but we
So
talked
it's-
to EPA, and they said the same thing. Well, if you issue a stop work order, it's going to continue the
Exactly.
problem for longer. So
My
don't do
point
that
is
work.
to give urgency to this task and get it on the warrant. That's all.
Gotcha. Thanks, John.
Does anyone else have anything for us?
Bill or Caroline, any questions?
No, I mean, you asked some good questions. Appreciate that, Bill. I was curious, I don't know if it's a fair question, is like, how would it have materially changed any one of these 9 projects if this was in place today?
Well, if it was a common plan or development or sale, the planning board could have required one permit for the entire site, all 9 parcels, and that could really have.
Right, so could that mean the 3 that are remaining unpermitted, could they become non-buildable because you have to do the terracing or whatever the solve might be
Oh, I don't
for
think any-
the common area? I'm just curious. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that.
I don't know that any could become non-buildable. I'm sure that they all could be buildable using
With
the
the proper design.
techniques that Jonathan alluded to. But it's conceivable that we could look at at least the contiguous remaining lots as part of a common plan of development, I'd say.
So I can address that again. So the advantage of looking at it as a common plan of development and contiguous lots is there can be an economy. In other words, folks can share the solutions and reduce the cost, effort, and permitting. So there's an advantage to that. You can also take each individual lot and using environmentally sensitive site design and proper stormwater management strategies and develop each individual lot. So it doesn't require a common plan of development for a solution. It's not in any way a taking, it's not in any way a limitation of what's buildable. It's really just doing it right, which is not difficult.
Can I ask?
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I don't know if this is a Patrick question, and I have not read it well enough to understand, but how much of the approval process is subjective versus objective? Is it if you meet certain requirements, we will objectively permit it? Or is it there is still an out where the planning board can say, we just don't like it? No.
That's a good question. So the state has very, very specific metrics for what constitutes an approvable stormwater management plan. So that's your first sort of order of evaluation, your first set of metrics. Beyond that, there's a fairly subjective set of criteria that the planning board looks at, but that's really quite secondary to the metrics that are numbers. They're engineering numbers, rate of absorption and maximum amount of water that, falls in any particular event. Those are all calculations. In fact, they're software. It's just software that you fill in the numbers on at this point. So it is objective. So there's no risk here in this creating a situation where these steeper slopes are undevelopable. Again, it just requires better planning. That's all it is.
And Jonathan, before you walk off.
Sure.
You had said there was definitely this objective matrix that.
Yes, it's
computer
software. It's literally
algorithm, you punch in
software.
Numbers, it tells you what.
Yeah.
But then you said there's a secondary kind of gateway that is more subjective with the planning board. Can
Yes.
you give us an example?
Sure.
Or a couple examples?
Sure. So the Volume 2 of the State Stormwater Management Guidelines, handbook rather, they speak about basically environmentally sensitive site design, where first you evaluate what the conditions are on site. Is it a steep slope? Are there any stream courses? You're looking at the resources, and then it asks that you use environmentally sensitive site design techniques, which outlines what those are. In other words, before you put water in pipes and in basins, you try to work with the topography. It's very simple. It's very common sense, actually. And then it says, when you've exhausted those possibilities, now go into what's called best management practices. And those are engineering strategies that collect the water, reabsorb the water, maybe hold the water in a basin. But it just says prioritize working with the topography first. So again, the thrust of stormwater management standards is the engineering, but it does ask you to look at the contextual limitations of the site, and then to the best of your ability to work with the existing topography and leave as much as you can undisturbed. And again, that comes back around to good planning. There's always ways to develop steep sites.
So if they, and I guess I'm coming back to kind of figuring out what the subjective is. I understand what you said, but I didn't quite get a concrete example. So I'm thinking.
Can I give one?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would take the pressure off of Bridge Street for a second, but.
Sure.
In the 55-plus community, right, there was a lot of discussion you guys had about not liking the slope of that site, subjective or objective. Talk about that project and how this bylaw or this policy change would affect the development that was proposed.
It wouldn't affect that project because that project had.
Right, and may I just interject
Yeah.
that there's ongoing discussions and mediation, so I think maybe we should be circumspect about speaking to that.
I was trying to find examples of things we talked about in town. We've talked about slope.
Yeah,
I don't think
so,
they're violating any.
Well, let's use
Yeah.
a different example
Yeah,
then.
I would prefer if we
Yep.
didn't use that example. That
So-
would not be appropriate.
So under stormwater management, again, there's very little, if you don't follow the engineering principles, that prevents a project from going forward. It really just, it's mostly conditioning it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I guess my question was leading to, if it meets all the criteria in the first part, that's the non-objective part, the subjective part, is that still, the planning board could deny it, or you would have to approve it with conditions?
generally, the approach would be to approve it with conditions. That would be, that's how the bylaw is set up. That's how the precedents are legally. So it would be very difficult, very challenging to overturn a project based on stormwater, based on the subjective portions of stormwater management. I think if you looked at case law, there's probably very little where it's been overturned because of that.
And then kind of a follow-up on that is some of the more subjective things that we're kind of talking about, but not talking about, I guess. Would some of that be covered in rules and regs that you'll discuss later on down the road? It would be maybe part of rules and regs in making things a little bit more concrete, so your subjective is a little bit more non-subjective, if that makes sense.
In the bylaw, we have referenced Volume 2 of the Stormwater Management Handbook. And in Volume 2, the Commonwealth lays out the specific steps that one should take in designing a stormwater management system. So step 1 is to do what Jonathan said, which is to look at the topography and try and find non-structural solutions to solving the wastewater and the stormwater management runoff issues. And if when you think about it, the non-structural solutions are safer because the structural solutions oftentimes require perpetual maintenance. And so if you're using the natural topography in an intelligent and informed way, you're lessening the risks over time that there will be potential problems.
And frequently it costs less. It costs the developer less, and it's more sustainable, and it's more, it costs the owner less. Or if it's a condominium development, it costs them less because it doesn't require ongoing maintenance. So it's just good planning.
John,
It's-
just quick on the
Sure.
objective versus subjective.
Sure, go ahead.
I think a lot of the updates are engineering out the subjectiveness of
Gotcha.
the bylaw. And you have the benefit.
I just,
think you would say you have-
we don't do well with subjective in
I
town.
understand, yeah,
Just
yeah.
full honesty
So
here.
right now you have the
So-
benefit, I guess I'll say, you might have the benefit now and a bunch of engineers and architects on the board, good and bad. But the next version of the board may not be engineers and architects. So this actually points them to specific references already given in the state handbooks that say, look here. When you're looking at an application of this permit, look here.
Right.
And it'll explain very well what you need to do without having to be an engineer and understand.
That makes me feel a little better. Thanks,
What's
Ben.
really quite extraordinary is if you spend a few minutes reading the state stormwater handbooks, they're really accessible. They're written actually for the layperson. And so the great thing is by aiming developers in that direction, it really kind of educates them and promotes success rather than failure. That's the mission here.
And when you think about it, if all that we had was the objective standards and those are the ones that are plugged into the computer, our job, we don't have a job. I mean, if it's just objective, you don't need a planning board because you just say, is the computer program accurate? Did the numbers work?
But most of it is,
business.
most
But
of it is
some-
objective, though.
Yeah, most of it's
90% of it is
But you
subjective.
want to use those objective standards after you've employed a really smart, environmentally sensitive site design, so that you don't have environmental problems, really, that's the point. You know, don't
Right.
avoid the kind of runoff issues that we're having in Bridgeton.
I got one question related to that, and I gotta do more homework, I guess, but maybe Pat can answer this question too, but in terms of someone can have a probably really good design, right? But the process of getting from there to the good design is construction. So does this bylaw take care of both the final product and the construction? Or-
Yes, both.
It's the whole
Both.
thing, it's
It's
a
the whole
pro-
package, yes.
Okay,
The
yeah,
whole-
I had that question too.
Yeah, start to finish.
Yep.
Okay.
It's not just construction,
Right, it's the end product and the way to, and how you get there.
yes.
Okay, that's what I wanna make sure of, okay.
All right, any other questions or comments from the board or anybody else?
So I don't know if anybody else has I always like to, anybody else wants to ask a question or?
So dreams are made of.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you, Marnie.
Thank
So I
you,
mean,
Pat.
so there's this on the agenda twice.
No, one
Right.
is Browns. and
One's
one
Browns Hill,
Step-
this is the stormwater.
Oh, but then look
And
after
then discuss
Browns
a
Hill.
possible vote to reopen the SDM warrant.
What are we-
Right.
Is that what we're doing now, or is that,
now, or is that?
is that the next agenda
It
item?
feels like we shouldn't do that till we see the final version.
Well,
Well, you need
that's,
to, you need
that's,
to, you need to, we need to reopen the warrant and tell town council to draft an article for the warrant. I don't want to, may I ask, Marty, you have 2 meetings left this month and 2 meetings in October?
I believe so. I didn't bring the schedule with me, but we certainly have a meeting on
But-
Thursday, and then 2 weeks from now, we have another meeting, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but the planning board sometimes schedules 3 meetings in a given month. That doesn't make me popular, but it does happen.
So,
If we ran into any kind of need to expedite things or to expeditiously, we really can do that. But I think we're really close on finalizing this, and really, the way I look at it, I just want to really understand it and make sure there's no ambiguity, because we're really trying to address.
Hey, Marnie, I hate to interrupt you, but if you wouldn't mind, just so the folks at home on Zoom can hear you too. I apologize
We're
for...
really just trying to
Talk so
address a problem that manifested itself almost out of the blue with respect to Bridge Street. And as Joe recognizes, we really don't want this to go on if we can get this on the warrant.
So by way of information for the planning board, if the board does vote to reopen the warrant and allows this to go forward, I'd need to have, the final version of the bylaw to be included with the warrant by October 19th at the latest.
October 19th.
Because that's the date I've given the FinCom to have their final recommendations, and that stuff all has to go to the printer, so we can have it in the hands of the voters 2 weeks before the vote, so.
So you need it by October 19th, and then we can have our public hearings, though, toward the end of October, if necessary.
It's cutting it real close.
Yeah, so this is the thing, you can legally do that, but that means that the warrant and the article
already
will
out.
be out without recommendations from you. I don't imagine that the FinCom would vote to make a recommendation until they'd seen a final version, and I don't imagine, so we'd be at the town meeting floor with all three boards trying to make a recommendation on the floor of town meeting. My experience is that gets very confusing for voters, they get very nervous.
Okay, well, the most significant question that I will have for Alex Weshart at our next meeting is our timeline.
Okay. So-
And
Right,
so he can coordinate with you as to the specific date. So you need everything by October 19th, and to the extent it's humanly possible, we'll make it happen. But as I said, we're very close. And so I think we can finalize everything at our meeting September 7th, so.
Right. And I think it's important, needs to get done. It's a 9-month run out anyways, even if it passes, right? More than that, maybe. I don't think we should have obstacles in our way that we create, but the obstacles are going to be more on your end to build public consensus and support and get it written. And so it's like us voting to reopen doesn't mean necessarily we support the bylaw yet. We just support the process you're doing because we think it's important. So I'd be in favor of supporting the process because it's important, but we can always pull, if it doesn't get to the point where we feel comfortable with it, we voted to pull things from the warrant as well.
Or just make a recommendation on the town meeting floor to
Yeah.
continue without a
Right.
vote until.
Right.
Right. So I don't-
Essentially table it at town.
Yeah, so I don't think us opening the warrant, not putting it on it is, I think it doesn't create,
Yeah, I think they've done good work. I
Right.
think it's a valid process, valid product. I worry about the timeline,
right, I do too,
extremely
yes.
worried about the timeline.
But it's always, sometimes when a company doesn't pass the first time, and it passes the second time, it's that much more impactful that people sort of, it creates some momentum, so.
And
I
I guess to
actually-
town council's point, if I may interject, Marty, that it's more of a general bylaw instead of
Yeah.
a zoning bylaw. If something happens at fall town meeting, we can adjust and bring it back for ATM, correct, Tom?
Right, I think so.
Because it's not a zoning bylaw, we don't have to wait that period of time
You don't have to wait 2
for the
years.
cool off.
Yes,
2
that's
years.
correct. And as I said, because it's not a zoning bylaw, there is no mandatory planning board hearing required.
Right.
This is not a bylaw amendment
Right.
under 40A Section 5. So, well, certainly, as the
We don't
planning...
technically have to have the hearings.
That's
but-
correct. They don't have to. It's a good idea, I think,
It's just
under the
good practice.
circumstances, but it's not required.
Right, thank you, Tom.
Right, so that, I think that's where we are, we're ready to go, and,
So
Well,
that-
I would say that, yeah, whatever we do tonight, we're in favor of it, so whether we decide it goes on this vote or the next town vote, it's something you should still continue to work hard on, because it's gonna get in front of us soon, so, yeah, but thank you for all the hard work.
I know, I had a momentary relapse in my thinking, but I actually became aware of the flooding on Bridge Street from social media on the Hamilton Wenham Facebook page.
Yep.
We all
So
did,
I
yeah.
actually think there's support among members in the town to get this problem addressed. And I know that the abutters were really quite upset when the application for the stormwater management permit was withdrawn. So the abutters have been aware of this issue and want it resolved. And I think other people in town, they were posting videos of the flooding on Facebook. So I don't anticipate that there'll be a lot of pushback from the people in town. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't see where the downside is for the public here.
Well, that's why I'm asking what developers say, it's always good to get their opinion too, so.
They have to live in town, though.
Well, you don't have to live in town to be a developer, and we rely on them too, and it's good to get, and I'm not saying to change the bylaw, but at least get their opinion so you know what you're up against.
Yeah. All right,
If we do
so
a motion, would we put the stipulation, providing that documents are finalized by the 19th, or is that?
we
not
can
necessary?
when we get to that point, yeah.
I don't know, is it worth?
Well,
doing
it's still
that?
gonna be on the warrant regardless, so we just would have to
Right,
table
it's
it.
still gonna be on the warrant if we open it and put it
Even
on.
if we
So
put
it's
that
gonna be as a
concession, it's still
placeholder,
gonna
whether
be
it's. our-
Not
you
if
know.
we make a provision that says, well, by the 19th, right, it just stays off
I
the
think it's already
warrant.
gonna be on there.
He said he
think once we open
goes
it-
in.
Unless you reopen the warrant. You guys have to reopen the warrant.
We'd have to reopen the warrant on the,
On that meeting around the 19th, right?
and it goes
Which
to
would be-
printer when?
It goes to,
Like the next day.
You'd
it's
have to
going to the 20th. You're having, your meetings aren't, is before the 19th.
don't align that way,
You
yeah.
don't align,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, that's my question, why we have to open it, can't we just wait till our next meeting 2 weeks from now and open and close it on that day? If it's not finalized, and they're not gonna finalize it in their next 2 meetings, why do we have to
We
do anything
could,
tonight?
we could. Well, let's pause on that discussion.
Okay.
And let's move on to our next discussion, then we'll circle back to that. Give us a minute to think about it while we're hearing about the Browns Hill.
I don't think it's a bad idea, it shows, I liked what you said, we don't want to be the one obstacle. I mean, if everyone's
Right.
gonna work hard to get somewhere, I mean,
Right.
I'm all in. I mean, we need it, I saw the same videos.
All right, so up next, and then we'll circle back to opening the warrant and et cetera. So up next, we have discuss the status and progress on Browns Hill Overlay District bylaw with the planning board chair again, Marty Crouch.
Recording in progress.
It's been in progress, been recording.
The Browns Hill Overlay District bylaw is in really quite good shape. We have managed to put the whole package together. Substantively, it's pretty much complete. We have allocated the metrics to various tables and exhibits. We have the metrics to finalize. At our last meeting, however, we were reminded of John Witten's opening segue when we started working with him that the overlay district and the development agreement work hand in hand. And I'm going to let him speak, and he can reiterate what he told us. But he advised the planning board to be cautious about proceeding because we had not had sufficient input from the seminary, and that in his experience, that if we were to go forward to town meeting without the development agreement, which really answers many of the questions that a overlay district cannot answer. The development agreement is a contract between the seminary and the town, and it addresses elements that are important to the site, but that are not the subject of a zoning overlay district. So he advised that to go to town meeting without the development agreement would be an extraordinary risk, and that in his experience, if a zoning bylaw was not approved, that it's sometimes nigh impossible to get it reconsidered at a subsequent town meeting. So, John, I know you're on the call. I don't know if you would like to speak to this, but we did have quite a lengthy discussion about the status, our status. And I know, Joe, you asked the planning board to work diligently to make sure that we had the opportunity of getting this overlay district on the warrant and before town meeting, and we did that. We're close, but at this juncture, we feel that it might not be the best use of our time to continue in the absence of a more robust engagement with respect to the development agreement.
Hi, John.
Hey, John.
Hi, good evening, members of the board and Madam Chair. So, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would just be very brief and be available to answer any questions that the select board might have. I completely concur with the chair's comment. My concern all along, and I think we all share this, including the seminary, is that this approach be holistic, that the bylaw and the development agreement do work hand in hand. It's a total belt and suspenders approach. mostly because we don't know what the development will be. So we have these two processes working together. The regulatory approach, town meeting adopts a zoning bylaw in the normal course. But the contract approach is really critical here because there are so many things we can't do through zoning that we could do through a development agreement to contract arrangement between the select board and the seminary or subsequent purchasers. So one independent of the other really does not work. This is not a traditional zoning approach because we're trying to tweak and define a development in a very micro manner, and it's almost impossible to do solely through zoning. So all along, the hope, the kind of anticipation would be that the seminary would be able to reach a development agreement with the select board, and at the same time, we'd be able to go to town meeting with an overlay district and respond to town meeting that their worst fears, their concerns about kind of what could happen have been addressed contractually. It doesn't mean that it's over. It just means that we really need the seminary, and I've said this publicly several times, we really need the seminary to work with the planning board, explain what in the draft they're good with, what in the draft they're opposed to, and that would allow us to then sit down with them and the select board to craft the development agreement to fill in the blanks. And that's the piece that we're just not there yet. It's not a criticism of the seminary. It's just that we're really kind of collectively waiting for their feedback, because otherwise, I agree with the chair, going to town meeting without a development agreement is going to meet an uncertain fate, I think. The public is entitled to know what those gap fillers are, and the gap fillers are done through the development agreement.
Thank you, John.
I would just add that, with respect to the overlay district, the draft that is now presently on the table was reviewed by John Whitten, and he provided me with a red line version, and I think virtually all of his suggested comments or edits were accepted. And so we have a robust hybrid overlay district draft bylaw. And as I said, there are metrics that have to be filled in, but it doesn't seem at this juncture that we should keep going whole hog because we don't have the requisite development agreement and the requisite feedback from the seminary. But I think that if you have the opportunity, and I hope it's posted on our webpage, to look at it, it does provide for two options, one predicated on the illustrative plans that were prepared by
It must be really frustrating that the town is not more engaged.
Absolutely.
By Jonathan Poor and Emil Dahlquist, and another option where a developer could come in and propose its own concept plan. And we have an incentive to use the illustrative plans, but there is no requirement that a developer do so. And then, other than that, I would say that the bylaw itself and the special permitting requirements are entirely consistent with all the other bylaws that we have in town. And in fact, many of the provisions are drawn from the senior housing bylaw or other bylaws that are on the books.
So has the seminary seen the most recent version and commented on it or not? Okay.
Yeah, come on up, Ed.
Wait, sorry.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Ken Barnes with the seminary. Thank you for allowing us to speak about that. We've seen the most recent iteration. We are working on a red line version of it now. But before we get to that, I just want to address something because there is a misconception out there that needs to be rectified. And it's a really important misconception. And if I'm responsible for this misconception, I will take full responsibility. But on the 29th of August, someone wrote a letter to the planning board asking a question about the most recent iteration. It's a reasonable question. The response that they got from the person representing the planning board was the following. Just as an FYI, The planning board chose to postpone the rezoning effort as the seminary recently chose to pursue a primarily residential focus involving the 209 student apartments only, which was significantly different from what the planning board had been working toward, which included scenarios with multiple uses and the entirety of the GCTS campus property. That is patently false. It is absolutely wrong. We have not withdrawn any of our support for the Browns Hill Overlay District. What happened was, at the June 27th meeting, the question was raised in this room about the complexity of the proposed bylaw, which in its current iteration is 32 pages long. That's not a criticism, it's an observation. The work is beautiful work. I mean, Jonathan and Emil and the others should be very proud of the fact that they've done beautiful work. Do we agree with all of it? No. That's why we're doing a red line. However, at that meeting on the 27th of June, the chair said that there needs to be two things to happen from here on. One, the planning board needs to continue to finalize, refine, work with John Witten and others to get the planning bylaw done. And secondly, the seminary needs to come back and tell us what you think. So on the 11th of July, I read a letter into the record saying that our concern, which was raised by the chair herself at the meeting in June, is that due to the complexity, it may be very difficult for the town to get their heads around it at town meeting. So, what do we do? Do we allow perfect to be the enemy of good? Or do we maybe take this in two phases? And our recommendation, and it was only a recommendation on the 11th of July, was, why not just propose a portion, a bylaw that only deals with the 209 existing apartments because they already exist and because there's been no controversy between the planning board and the seminary, et cetera, on what to do with those apartments. Everyone agrees they're already there. So it would put on the warrant a very simple phase one bylaw, which says, while we work on the whole campus, and we don't disagree that there should be ultimately a zoning overlay for the whole campus. But while that continues to work out, let's go for the low-lying fruit and get those apartments on the tax rolls to generate $1.6 million in taxes, to help the town with some of its 40B requirements, to help the seminary in terms of a shorter distance to cash, which is very helpful at this point. And we continue to work on the rest of the property together. That's all we proposed. We never said that if you don't agree with this, we're going to take our ball and go home. We never said that. We are still, as I stand here, 100% committed to the BHOD. 100. We want to see it on the docket. We want people to get it, to vote for it, and pass it. That hasn't changed. None of that has changed. We've simply made this suggestion. Now, clearly, the planning board didn't agree with that suggestion, as that email I just read suggested. That's okay. If you don't agree with that suggestion and you want to continue to go down the road of let's do the whole thing at once, we're okay with that. We think there's a lot of risk in that. We're not sure it's necessary. But I can tell you right now, if the only thing standing in our way of that is the development agreement, I'll be in Joe's office tomorrow, if that's what it takes. We'll roll up our sleeves immediately and start working on that development agreement while we're doing the red line, because we are 100% committed to this process. We appreciate and we thank the planning board for the exceptional work they've done, but please, let's not get it out there, some notion that somehow we, because we made this suggestion about doing it in two phases instead of one, have abandoned the process. We are 100% behind the process, and we look forward to seeing it on the docket.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks. What's it?
Dr. Barnes, I'm not entirely sure who sent you that email. I certainly know it was not me.
It was not you.
So I think our concern was that despite having drafts of this overlay district on the table for quite some time, we had not received a red line version from you. And again, we're very cognizant of what John Witten said with respect to the development agreement. So the planning board is perfectly willing to resume its efforts, but we want to make sure that when we go to town meeting, it will be successful, because we take John Witten's advice very, very seriously. And the worst case scenario is to go to town meeting and have the overlay district fail, in which case everyone loses.
Agreed. So, with our previous comments from Marnie, Ken's talk about the splitting or not splitting of the campus, Marnie's kind of clarification rebuttal, let's talk a little bit about where we want to be with the Browns Hill overlay district. And as Marnie said, the planning board is still willing to work on it, but maybe talk more about some benchmarks, some timeline, things like that, because I think we all want to keep working on the overlay district, because it's in the best interest of the town and the seminary.
In Marnie's words, we don't want to play catch-up later.
We don't want to play catch-up later, and we don't want to
so-
end up with a bunch of A&Rs out there of
yeah.
60 McMansions or something like that, because we've all discussed and we've hired consultants, and they tell us that's not the best case scenario, right?
I can say this, that the overlay district that is on the table is very much responsive to the work product of the consultants that the town and the seminary paid for. We took their recommendations to heart. It's also responsive to the comments that we've received from abutters. They've been at all the meetings. They've expressed a lot of concern about the project. I think a few abutters may have threatened to sue us before we even have a finalized version of the overlay district on the table. That's an indication of their concern. So it's not a simple procedure, but what we've tried to do is look at all those constituencies and try and come up with something that is informative for developers. That's the form-based approach, the illustrative plans, but also has the flexibility that the seminary has indicated that it wants so badly. And we have indicated that there are several instances where uses can be as of right, but certainly with respect to new construction and any kind of concept plan that did not rely on the illustrative plans, we would require a special permit. And as I said before, that's entirely consistent with the town's approach to zoning elsewhere in town.
So
I'm happy to answer any questions.
in respect to the current, what's the word I'm looking for? Not status, but current level of, I'm going to say it terribly, but the doneness of the bylaw as of now, pending comments from the seminary, which seem like they're forthcoming. How close are we to having that to the public hearing stage and have a completed bylaw?
Well, can I ask a question that might help get an answer from Marnie? Ken, Marilyn, about when do you expect to have a red line version of the planning board so that they can consider that, make any adjustments that they choose to make, and prepare the document for a public hearing?
Well, we will have the red line version done in the next 2 weeks. However, let's be clear. We sent, I think, an 11-page document to the planning board about 2 months ago, outlining our response to that iteration. So it's not like the seminary has been silent on this. I mean, we have had a lot of input. And by the way, to the planning board's credit, they've made some movement because of that. We've seen changes to the iterations based on what we've said. So it's not like there's been radio silence and everyone's waiting for this red line version. I can show you copies of all the documents that we have sent in response to the various iterations. So this latest red line version of what I think I'm hearing, correct me please if I'm wrong, this is sort of the final version now. The planning board is very happy with the current iteration. That red line version will be in your possession as soon as we can get it out. There's nothing keeping us, by the way, in the meantime, from starting discussions with you on the development agreement, because we've had several meetings, as you know, with yourself, John Whitten, on the development agreement. But let me just add this one last point. And this is, I think, for the select board and the planning board to decide. As close as this version may be, on a risk-reward calculus, is there wisdom in doing it in 2 phases? It doesn't negate all of that hard work. That hard work will manifest itself in the second phase, and we do this in 2 phases, and the first article that the people see couldn't be simpler, because it's dealing with existing buildings. So I just want to reiterate that in our opinion, there's no reason why this can't be done with 2 phases. But we're ready to do whatever it takes, because we are still committed to the process.
Just before you sit down,
Can I respond to?
Hold on just one second, Marty.
I got a question. 2 weeks is a long time, given how close we're getting here. The planning board needs to advertise a public hearing. That takes at least 2 weeks of notification. I need to have the final documents and some sense of whether this is going forward by October 19th. So if you wait 2 weeks to get us a red line version, we're probably going to be too late.
Then we'll get it to you sooner than that.
Is the red line version going to have language that could be in the final version? Are you going to have just quick comments? Are you going to write a bylaw that you agree to? You're going to write it?
Yeah, and to Bill's point, I think that's more helpful. Yeah. Marilyn, if you want to stand up and we can kind of...
I just want to respond to what Dr. Barnes. So the planning board did consider the letter from the seminary regarding a separate overlay district for the dormitories alone. Now, I happened to listen to Rick Mitchell's comments on October 11th, 2022, and they were very prescient. But he was talking about, and this was before the consultants were hired, about a piecemeal approach to this property. And that is something that the planning board does not wish to see happen here. So we see the piecemeal approach. The first piecemeal approach was the sale of the 19-plus acres on Bridge Street. The second piecemeal would be the dormitories. That leaves the rest of the site. I don't see that as advantageous to the town. And, moreover, the sale of the dormitories could take place within the context of the existing Brown Hills Overlay District, because the reuse of the dormitories is as of right. So that reuse of those dormitories for apartments would be as of right, probably subject to site plan review, and it's dependent on a development agreement between the seminary and the select board to itemize or to agree on what, if any, percentage of those apartments should be allocated to affordable housing. But all that is accommodated within the existing overlay district. And, this piecemeal approach to this property is obviated, because really, we have to think of this property not in the next 3 or 4 years. Not in the next 5 or 10 years. We have to look at it long-term, 50 years from now. It has to be something that the town and the seminary can both be proud of, and it has to be developed in a cohesive way, and not just splitting off pieces of this property as time goes on. I don't think that's the wisest approach.
I couldn't agree more with what you just said about the fact that what I'm suggesting is provided for in the bigger bylaw. Exactly. That's why I'm suggesting it, because it's not controversial. It's already provided for in the larger bylaw. But it will only be effective if the whole bylaw passes. And my concern is, and concern you expressed at the meeting in November, in June on the 27th, that this 32-page bylaw may be very difficult for the town to digest at the town meeting. So while it's provided for in the larger bylaw, if it is dependent on people understanding the whole thing, it doesn't do us any good. So it's not a piecemeal approach. We are saying, let's effect this simplest portion first, because the town benefits tremendously from it, we benefit from it, and it's not in any way an abandonment of the rest of the process. It's not an abandonment at all. We're all for having the whole property rezoned, absolutely. All we're saying is, let's not put all of our eggs in that basket that it's all 32 pages or nothing, when we're in agreement already on the simplest part, which is the existing apartments.
Rick, you're just quoted, so it's appropriate you're here.
Yeah, I've been watching this on
Rick,
Rick,
I hate to interrupt you because I know you probably have a good point, but you have a quorum now.
We're not in any planning mode.
But your arguments here could be construed as deliberating toward a decision. I'd be very concerned about any of the planning board continuing to speak now that there's a quorum of the board here.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Rick. I worry about that, and Tom, you could probably concur with that.
Yeah, we don't want to create.
We don't want to get into an OML violation. So, the board.
That's us.
Digest, yes.
Yeah.
Digest everything you just heard.
I mean, I think it was, I'm glad we had a discussion. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
I felt we moved something towards something, but we didn't resolve it. So the question is timeline.
Right.
Timeline's not going to work for this town meeting. It's just not. I mean,
Well,
I have a hard time imagining going to, but
yeah, I mean, that's the decision the board has to make if you want to.
This on top of the storm water discussion we just had.
I'm going to say this.
Hold on just one second, Marnie. Let us discuss and then.
I just want to say this, though. I'm going to follow John Witten's wisdom on these things because he has the experience with respect to this. And I know at one point I did say this bylaw was complicated, but I don't think it's any more complicated than the Great Estate Overlay District or the Open Space and Farmland Development bylaw, which, by the way, is more complicated than this overlay district. So I just wanted to make those points. But I think in this circumstances, we really have to be guided by someone who has some significant experience with this.
So, I want the board to discuss a little bit, but John, before the board discusses, is there anything that you think you can add to this discussion?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd offer this, and I appreciate Dr. Barnes's comments. I think the goal here is cooperative, and I think we can accomplish that. I don't see the utility in Dr. Barnes's proposal as a second overlay district. I think that is really defeating, and it's not intentional on his part, but I think the holistic goal of the overlay and the development agreement was to treat the 102 acres holistically. If the town meeting is asked to carve out the lower campus for an instant project and leaves the 2/3 of the remaining campus to a future project, that kind of defeats the idea of a holistic approach. It could be done. I don't disagree that it could be done. It's just not what I think the consultants were charged with doing, and certainly not what the planning board has been attempting to do. So I think the goal to the select board and the planning board still should remain a holistic approach for the 102 acres. The town knows these 102 acres as a collective 102 acres. Certainly the lower campus can be severed from the main, but there's infrastructure issues, most notably wastewater. There's the roadway network, there's the open space network. So I think it raises more trouble than I think the seminary really wants. It's, obviously I'm not going to speak for the seminary, but I think severing the 102 acres into discrete parts before the bylaw is adopted is certainly inconsistent with the overall goal, which is treating the 102 acres comprehensively.
Thank you, John.
We no longer have a quorum on the planning board.
Yeah, I know.
Just so you know that.
Thank you, Pat and Jonathan.
Pat and Jonathan removed that obstacle from.
That's why they opened the window.
Discussion.
So, Rick, if you just pause a minute, keep the thoughts in your head. Let's discuss for a second, and then we'll let Rick comment. Or do you want Rick to comment now? Or you think of add to anything to our discussion?
I always want to hear Rick before
All right,
I
Rick,
speak.
come on up.
Yeah. Thank you to my fellow board members.
You chased them off.
Yes. I just want to say that this has been a very complicated issue, and we started certainly with Joe, Sean, and myself, getting the consultants on board and getting the seminary to the table to talk about this. And it's certainly been a long and intense process. The one thing that's holding this up now really is the seminary has yet to determine what it wants to do. It hasn't determined whether it's staying or whether it's going, and if it's staying, where it's staying, and in what form it's staying. So we can't, as a planning board, and as John Whitten said, contractually engage with a owner who is unable to engage in a definitive discussion. So it's not that the planning board is holding this up. And as a matter of fact, at the last planning board meeting, Scott Sundquist, the president of the seminary, said Cushman Wakefield, who had been engaged to determine and identify potential buyers, had several potential buyers that were in line that had some potential uses of the property, and advised that by mid-September, they could come to the planning board and reveal what those might be. That's great. That would be the one great thing that would happen, that we would have a definitive proposal that we could then say, okay, does this work? Is the proposal consistent with what we're trying to do? Is it a developer that we can negotiate with? And is it a plan that actually will work? But until the seminary can provide concrete information on where it's going, when it's going, how it's going, and who's going to be participating, we're dead in the water. We can't move forward. So despite all the good intentions and expressions of interest, we haven't got anything yet. And until we do, we're dead in the water. Thank you.
May I, just to contribute real quick before the select board discusses without my input. I think that we have, the select board and the planning board have at least 3 more meetings before we finalize the book of, the warrant and the book of recommendations. The seminary has indicated that they can get us a red line version of the current draft of the bylaw so that you could move forward in that. We can engage with them. If mid-September comes up and the seminary feels like they can be more definitive, we do have time, but we need to keep pushing the ball forward so that the planning board can advertise its public hearing and at least get that statutory requirement out of the way. We can always, the week of October 16th, make the determination that we'll make a recommendation for no action at town meeting so that we can take it up again in spring, if we feel like we're not going to get there in time. But to shut off the progress now, I think.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good plan.
My experience generally when we do, like, when you work really hard on something for a number of months and then you take a pause, it takes a while to get things all warmed up again. So if we were to just pause right now without being sure that we can get some definitive answers out of the seminary to help us with the last part of this, if we pause it now, I don't envision this really coming up again until January or February, and then we'll be in the same crunch, trying to get everything wrapped up in time for April. So my recommendation would be to try to leave this on the warrant, ask the planning board in good faith, if the seminary gets us back to us in the next week, 10 days, you try to get something done on the 19th, and we can make a determination in early October, is this a go or no-go? But I don't know that making the decision tonight, where we're so close, and the planning board has done a lot of work. They've worked so hard. They've had so many long meetings. I'd really like to see if we can move this closer to resolution.
Joe, I agree
Go
with
ahead.
you, but I have to speak for some of the members of the planning board. They have put in an enormous amount of time.
Yep.
And I can speak for myself. I have put in an enormous amount of time. And at some point, you say, should we go on? I mean, we need to see the enormous amount of time reciprocated in some way. And I know that John Whitten spoke about a red line copy months ago, at least a month ago. Am I right, John? It was a while ago. I mean, we haven't had that kind of concrete feedback about what we've done, other than to suggest that we carve off the dormitories. Well, as we all know, that was attempted before the ZBA, and the ZBA took a straw poll. I was corrected on that they would permit the change of use but not the variance. So, I mean, that's always been kind of in the background, and we're aware of that. But as I said before, the overlay district that's on the table now could accommodate a developer taking those dormitories and reusing them. So it's that should not be a real impediment. And I think the abutters are aware of how this overlay district is formulated. I cannot say that they are entirely on board with it. They have extreme concerns. They have a lot of concerns about the shared infrastructure. And at our last meeting, Jake Vermeer, who is a resident of Essex Street, but also a developer, was expressing the notion that, in his view, the seminary could conduct a traffic study predicated on the intensity of development that's contemplated in the overlay district draft, as well as also to ascertain the capability of the wastewater treatment center, so that there are things that could have been happening pertinent to the development agreement that have not happened, and that really, in my mind, suggest some difficult negotiations ahead. So, I'm guardedly optimistic, but I know months and months ago, I provided information about what should be in a development agreement. And the Collins Center at the University of Massachusetts had an article about what should be in a development agreement. And I had all the questions about what should be in a development agreement. And that's never been addressed. So, to John Whitten's point, that has to be a robust negotiation, and has to really look long and hard about how this kind of shared infrastructure is going to be handled. Because any developer coming in here, the first question they're going to ask is, what about the wastewater treatment? How are the roads going to be handled? What is going on here? So these are all issues, and they're made more difficult, as John Whitten says, because there's no actual development. So again, I will repeat that the planning board will work hard, but I think we need to see real movement with respect to the development agreement before we really put the, step on the gas really hard.
Mayor, when you wanted to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair. I can tell you that we'll get that red line to you. Again, there's helpful to get some of these misconceptions. What I will do is I will go to the letter that we sent to the planning board about 3 months ago, and I will look at that, and then I will make the changes to the draft. So the suggestion that we've been silent is simply not true, and it's unfair. We've been very detailed. We have asked the planning board numerous times since January to send a couple of members up there to meet with us, because in January they came out with a plan of land showing the different zoning districts, and we wanted simply to walk the property with them and explain why we had some concerns about how they've drawn the lines. We've been asking now for 8 months to have that meeting to walk through the seminary. We've repeated that on numerous occasions. Dr. Barnes and I have said, and in writing and at meetings, we'd like to have you come up so we can walk the property and show why this line doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense to delineate the property that way. So
We've provided a lot of information. We will provide the red line. I think I'd like to bury this word piecemeal once and for all. It is completely inapplicable here. We have apartment buildings that have been there for the 40 and 50 years that the chair talked about. They've been there, they've been used that way, they're not going to change. There's not going to be a change in use, practical use. The benefits to the town are significant with respect to the 40B aspect, which we're willing to negotiate on, and significant in terms of the tax revenues, and it's something that we can all agree on. It's been used in some form of leverage on the seminary to try to get us to agree to everything. We can't build anything on the rest of the property unless there is a zoning bylaw in place. It's still going to be the way that it is until there's an agreement. So the town, the planning board has complete leverage over the seminary in terms of developing the rest of the property. We're committed to going forward with the bylaw. We're looking practically, just even the things that the chair has said at this meeting indicate to me a certain pessimism at being able to get a robust, complete, holistic bylaw in place for the town meeting in November. I've been coming before the board for the last 18 months on this. I said in the first meeting that time was of the essence, that the seminary needed to move in order to get some finances to deal with its operations. And one of the easy, low-hanging fruit for everybody, not just the town and not just the seminary, but everybody, are the apartments. So we'll get that. We'll get that to the town, but we still would like to put in place this idea that there could be a bylaw that would handle that piece. We're committed to going forward. These issues of infrastructure and the septic, the wastewater treatment plant, I don't believe that that's something that comes in the bylaw. So it's a bit of a, it doesn't affect whether you do a zoning bylaw. And the last thing I'd say is there seems to be a misunderstanding here that we have to have an actual development project proposed in order to amend a bylaw. That's simply not the case. You didn't do that in terms of the Tobacco Road overlay, commercial overlay district in Tobacco Road. I don't believe, maybe, I don't know, but maybe you did that with respect to the houses, the great estate. I don't know if that's the case. Plenty of bylaws get amended because you look at a piece of property and you say, what as a town do we think would be good there? Let's amend the bylaw to allow for those uses and what the kinds of regulations that would be in place. So this idea that we have to have a project and we don't have a project is immaterial to the process. The planning board can decide whether this is a good bylaw and we can negotiate that together. So we'll get the red line to you. We're committed to the process. We just want to put a placeholder that is still in play, this idea of putting a bylaw in place in 2 phases.
Do you have a bylaw? I mean, who's going to write that? If we say, okay, we'll put who's going to write that bylaw for the
phase one?
The phase one, because that would take
That's the
how
issue.
long to write it, unless you peel it out 5 pages out of the 32 and it already exists.
I think that's probably possible to do. Just use
Our
what's...
call, because I think
Yeah.
it has to be
Yeah.
sponsored by the planning board. But I heard like say, but I don't know what that means sort of timing wise. Do we? I mean, that's my question I was going to ask. Like, do we all agree that we need a development agreement to have a bylaw? Like, I don't know the answer to that question. Like, how are we going to decide that? 'Cause it sounds
I mean,
like
as Jonathan said many times, it's belt and suspenders, right? But you need to have a developed bylaw to know where the gaps are to fill with the development agreement. Am I wrong on that, Jonathan?
No, you're right, Mr. Chair. And let me just perhaps offer this, back to Merwin's comments, and I've enjoyed working with Merwin, so I don't mean to be critical, but I'll say this anyways. I don't think that I've ever said, and I certainly don't think the planning board's ever said, that it's not having a project that's the problem. It's that writing a zoning bylaw for 102 acres with historic structures and some really unique topography and infrastructure, writing a bylaw for the potential uses of that property is really, really difficult because there's so many variables and so many possibilities. The draft that was written following the consultant's testimony was attempting to have a whole bunch of mixed use in the middle and the upper campus, mixed use with biotech, with research and development. So that raises a whole bunch of collateral issues. Whether the lower campus is going to be solely housing, that raises collateral issues in terms of wastewater and stormwater runoff. In other words, it's really hard to dissect 102 acres that has been previously developed into a zoning bylaw with a player to be named later. So it's not that a zoning bylaw has to have a project in mind. In fact, I would agree with Marilyn, a lot of zoning is done anticipatory of a new development. But this parcel is unique given its built-out nature and its open space nature. So in this particular case, writing a zoning bylaw that will meet the concerns of the abutters, meet the goals of the town, and meet the goals of the seminary really begs the question, what project is in the pipeline? Does the seminary have a proposal? So I think everybody benefits by writing a bylaw that reflects a development that the parties want, and then even more to the point, writing a development agreement that reflects the details. So it's not that you can't do it, because towns do it all the time. It's that this parcel is as unique as there is certainly in the North Shore. And that's why the argument has been consistent. We need to know, what is it that you want? Are you looking for R&D? Are you looking for more housing? Are you looking for mixed use? That's how the planning board could craft the bylaw. And Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one more piece. What the planning board has done is really the best of both worlds. They've taken your consultant's information and plans, and they have created, as Marnie was saying earlier, a concept plan. This is what we think is the vision of this particular parcel. If you're not happy with that, or you want an alternative, you can propose that alternative. And that's the way the current draft reads. If the applicant or multiple applicants are not satisfied with what's laid out in the planning board's concept plan, then they can develop their own concept plan. So I think it really tries to accomplish this player to be named later problem. It would be really the next step that would allow us to draft the development agreement, which is to the seminary, can we obtain a conservation restriction on the abutting periphery of the parcel? Can we obtain cross easements for wastewater and stormwater? Really, the devil is in the details, and that's the beauty of the development agreement. It allows the select board to craft kind of the fine tuning that the regulatory process simply doesn't allow. I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
John. I just also want to put one thing to bed, and that's this notion that we're waiting with bated breath for someone to come with a proposal. Forget it. Forget it. The property hasn't even been offered for sale yet. We don't even have the, we don't even have the Alta survey done yet, okay? We have not given any developers a deadline for a proposal. So we can forget that. The whole purpose of this process was to ensure we could do this very difficult thing, as John said, which the planning board has done, which is be anticipatory, come up with these ideas. Would we have preferred Euclidean approach over form-based? Yes. We think the form-based approach complicated it. But hey, this has been a negotiation, it's been a consultation, it's been a cooperative thing from the beginning. So let's stay the course. Let's continue, as the chair said, she's cautiously optimistic that we can still get it done. And Joe, I think you're right. To kill it now would be really tragic. Let's keep doing what we're doing. As we said, we think there is value in doing it in 2 phases, but if that is not going to be a possibility, then let's get it done. Let's do what we have to do to get this on the agenda and get it done. Whatever happens in the meantime, whoever approaches us, whoever doesn't approach us, whatever Cushman Wakefield does is irrelevant to this process. We've got to deal with what we have, with what we know. And that, in my opinion, we've already seen is very, very far down the pike.
All right, back to the discussion that we haven't had yet. I think we'll close comments just because I think we're getting into not a back and forth, but
Circular.
A circular. So, with the 4 of us here tonight, general thoughts and maybe recommendations or asks of planning board or whatnot. For me, it seems like we're waiting on another red line version from the seminary for the planning board to look at, react to, and adjust with the information they get from that. And I would implore them to continue to develop the bylaw holistically, I think. I mean, I think the lower part of the campus, I think we all know what it's gonna end up being. It is what it is. Right? I don't know, to John Witten's point, kind of carving that off, I don't think it creates the piecemeal effect. I don't think the rest of the campus is gonna be holistically affected by the dorms staying dorms, basically.
Right.
Right? But the worry, I think, in the beginning of the process was that there would be too many different variables on the campus, it wouldn't relate to each other. Right? I don't think we're in danger of that, but I'm not sure if carving off that lower portion and then trying to get another second overlay district would be fruitful.
Unless there's some negotiation that happens from it that benefits the town. Give them this
Unless
now.
there's some developer
and
in
then-
hand
Right.
that
So I don't know,
wants to do the
right.
dorms.
It's negotiations, right? Negotiations have give and take, right? So I just don't know what the other side of that negotiation looks like. But they really want it, so can we get something out of it? Because they really want us to carve it out, so maybe we get something out of it too.
And I worry, though, if we do an overlay just on that residential portion that's already existing, are we starting from scratch again on an overlay district? And that extends our timeline.
I didn't hear that.
And there's-
Or is it 5 pages of the 31?
Yeah.
Or is it 5 pages?
Or can it
31? I
be
mean,
constructed as such? Because
Right.
I worry too, like, we get the red line back, we get, everybody continues their Herculean efforts and it gets done.
Red line's gonna
How do you
have this-
digest this, though,
Right,
for a
yeah.
November
Well,
6th
it's not gonna be
meeting?
new stuff, it's gonna be stuff that was on the 11-page email, just sort of rewritten and incorporated into it, right? So it's not new stuff. It's
Right,
just-
and as Marnie pointed out, and we know that if the campus is treated holistically, that use is already kind of covered in the entire overlay, so it wouldn't change anything if we did.
Just timing-wise of it.
Timing-wise.
Yes. That's all it is, timing. And the perception that we're doing
Timing and
carving
perception,
something.
right.
Oh,
I'm not worried about perception, but you're right.
I mean,
Didn't we say a year ago when we sat here going, oh, can we get it done? Everyone raise your hand, we're gonna get it done for the November meeting, right? And everyone said, oh, yeah, we'll get there.
No,
I know, I
to
know, I
Marnie's
remember you.
credit, she said, we will not commit to that.
Yeah, but what I wanted to call out was, didn't we say regardless of the end use or who the developer or the project might be, we need to protect the town and put stuff into place, so
Right.
whoever comes to the table, we're
we don't
further
want
down the
another,
path.
we don't want another
not
A
having
and R.
Bridge Street happen.
We don't want another A and R to happen.
Yeah.
This is our time to prevent that.
But I think that's part of the conflict here, which is the abutters do want that. They were very clear that they would roll the dice with residential because that's preferable to them. So you have that force that the abutters said out loud last time they were here, take all the time you need, because if this doesn't happen, we'll roll the dice with residential, because they don't want some other complex there. I'm very empathetic to the work that you guys have put in and sort of the challenges here, because I agree that at this point, like, the plan was to do something that showed that we were making an effort to create revenue for the town, non-residential revenue for the town. But I also see that the incentive structure, and I believe y'all, but I also think that, like, you have no incentive to hold for us in this process. Like, you can sell this land tomorrow to whomever, however, and
Build an A
and build whatever.
Properties,
Like,
right.
and so I'm sort of sensitive, I think, especially
Build
to.
an AR.
Well, no, they can only build
Build
an A and R
A&R.
under the current zoning. If they sell the
But
property.
that doesn't change their incentive to sell the property.
Toll Brothers could buy it.
Yeah,
or-
I mean, and I've heard anecdotally from multiple developers, whether rumor or not, that they're like, we'll fight the town after the fact. You sell the land. It doesn't actually matter. Like, we'll go back to the town and maybe they'll have a proposal and we'll do an overlay district after we buy the land. And so I am sort of questioning, like, I agree that in the interest of the town being non-abutter revenue seeking, alternative revenue seeking townsfolk, there is a reason to continue, but I also see the stalemate, which is like, what do we get from this? At the end of the day, there's no incentive really for Gordon Conwell to, like, play that hardball with us, because
There is incentive.
what?
Property becomes a lot more valuable. A lot more
Exponentially.
valuable,
If
exponentially
the zoning's
valuable.
already in place, the property's more valuable.
A lot more valuable.
As, with the overlay district?
Yes, 100%.
Because,
Okay.
because that's money the buyer doesn't have to spend to try and get the zoning changed later on.
And it's
done
not
for
just
that.
how.
But my understanding was, like, that wasn't actually that big of a deal. That we've talked to like 2 or 3 developers that were like, that's wouldn't keep us from doing this.
Well, that's negotiation
Okay.
language.
I don't think it is reasonable to try it. We've been working on this on a year, and once again, we're like 6 weeks out from town meeting, and we're like, throttle it, get it, like, we're not there. Like, we're not there, and that's not blame. Like, I completely see every issue and what happened, but I'm like, to what end? We tried. I would point to this as a case study for any person that was like, y'all can't get your stuff. Sure, come to these meetings. See how hard this is, but like, between now and October 19th, we're gonna try to like quickly iron this out and get this out there, like.
But wouldn't it be, even if it's, get it done by, instead of waiting, get it done by, so you miss this meeting, but still get it done by November 1st?
Fine. If we want to like set an arbitrary deadline, but I would make sure that we understand like what those goalposts are and why and what the benefit to them is, because I'm very empathetic that the planning board is probably going out of their minds. And some of this is a challenge of our own making, but some of this is like, the abutters are already threatening to sue us because they want single family houses. We're already asking if we can you could probably apply for 40B and get around this anyway without the overlays district if that's really what we wanted to do with the dorms. Like, it feels like we're acting like this thing has to be like a whole thing, and I'm like, there's workarounds for all of this if that's really what we want.
So your point about 40B is accurate, at least on the dorms part, on the student housing part. But that would give it a way to go forward where still work on one overlay district. And then if there's a different agreement to be had through 40B to activate that earlier than the overlay district gets passed, then you could almost have like a two-pronged approach.
But can't that happen if we do nothing? That's my point. Like,
Yeah, but then all you're gonna have is the 40B in the lower part and nothing else has changed.
but my point is, whether we say we're gonna split into two or we do nothing and work towards one, the same outcome can happen. Right? We can say we're gonna work towards perfect, and in the meantime, if Gordon Caldwell is so inclined, can pursue 40B. So it's not really a threat. It's like, fine, if that's really important and you guys need the cash, have at it. We're still gonna work towards something holistic. We're not gonna break off part of it and try to perfect the bottom versus the top. I feel like that's unnecessary work for the planning board. I feel like that's asking them to bifurcate this process in the 11th hour just in case. And that seems like.
There's gotta be more than that. They obviously just can't do it, or else they wouldn't ask for it. So there's a reason they can't do it without a bylaw.
No, let's be clear. Let's be clear about this. We volunteered to be involved in this process because we wanted to be good neighbors, because we were asked to do it. We've always had the 40B option. We view that as the nuclear option, okay? We came into this process in good faith. We're a seminary. We actually believe in the stuff we teach. We're trying desperately to work together with the town and in a cooperative way so that we have win-win situations. We're not looking for the town wins, the town loses, we win. We're looking for a win-win situation. We have a scenario where, through no fault of our own, we just don't need all the property that we have developed the way it's developed because our market has changed. More people are taking courses online, et cetera. So we just, the old model of theological education, where you packed up in Ohio in a van and you moved to Massachusetts, stayed here 3 years, and then went back to Ohio. That just doesn't happen the way it used to happen. So what do? We've got these assets. We have a fiduciary responsibility, a moral responsibility to try to maximize those assets. But you as a town, you want to generate tax revenue. We agree. We think that's a great idea. We want to help you do that. The affordable housing portion, we think that's a great idea. We think we all have a responsibility to do that. And we respect what the planning board is trying to do. This has been much more cooperative than the impression, if someone zoomed into this meeting for the first time, would have. This has been a very cooperative effort. So I'm with Joe. Let's keep going down this road. Let's see what we can get done in time. And
time for what, though?
In time for the meeting. In time for the town meeting.
October 19th.
Yes, and if
a single overlay district.
Well, that's what we appear to be going toward. Again, we would love to have done a smaller version, but let's just say for argument's sake.
No, let's say for actuality's sake.
Well, that's not my call. That's the planning board's decision.
You plan on bifurcating the bylaw into two zones before the 19th? Absolutely not, you
Okay,
cannot.
so they don't. So, that's fine. And like I said, we never said that if they say no, we're going to take our ball and go home.
I'm not saying take your ball, go
I know,
home.
yeah.
I'm saying like the reality of the option
No,
is,
so
if you
we
wanted to
stay-
pursue that, you can.
We stay with it. We're going to stay with the program. And we're going to work toward that out of respect for all the work that's been done and the whole spirit of this process. We want to work toward that. Do I have concerns about the complexity? Yes. But you know what? Funny things happen. There may be people who show up to that meeting and go, yeah, it's complex, but holy mackerel, it's detailed. They really did their homework. And it's going to raise a lot of money for the town, and nothing's going to really change in terms of the near term, in terms of how that property is used. Let's vote for it. I'm hoping that's what happens. But let's not kill it in the crib. Let's finish this process. We've all worked really hard on it. Let's finish the process.
2/3 vote, Tom? Correct.
2/3.
Do you all feel comfortable with that? Working towards the 19th, does that seem realistic?
I'm going to let.
No, go.
I would have to say I would be cautiously optimistic. I can't.
I appreciate that, Marty.
Because in a sense, this development agreement really has to address certain issues that are provided for in the overlay district. And one of the significant impediments, and I know the seminary might have issues with it, but what the planning board contemplated, wherever possible, a 100-foot buffer along the perimeter of this property to ameliorate the concerns of the abutters. So there are portions of this overlay district that really have to be addressed in a development agreement. And so there's work to be done. But again, it's not necessarily the work of the planning board at this point.
Right.
Yes,
Do you
so
want
my
to
question is,
add
how
anything
can we help?
Right.
How can we
I
help?
think that's a great question.
Yes,
How can the select board help?
I'm going to let the longest term serving member of the planning board
I just want to,
articulate his
actually,
opinion.
I just want to echo actually where I think you're going, Caroline, is politically, there's no way in hell this is going to pass in 6 weeks. There is an education process that has to occur with all the members of this community. I mean, there are probably 50 to 60 people in town that actually know what's going on. And you all know, you get to town meeting, and if you get 6, 10, 12, 15 people screaming bloody murder, that this hasn't been done too much, too fast, too soon, it's going to ruin the town. The rest of the people are all going to be sitting there going, well, I guess there must be a problem here, so we're not going to pass it. It has to pass with 2/3 majority. So I don't buy this thing, and I'll speak for myself, but I think I speak for you and Jonathan and Emil as well. They spent hundreds and hundreds of hours developing this. If we have to wait until spring town meeting to build a constituency and get the support, or at least the acknowledgement of the abutters that this can work and will benefit the majority of the town, then we shouldn't be rushing this because it's going to go to certain defeat. I mean, even the abutters, if we got this done, are going to have a million questions. And we're asking 6 weeks to come up with a development agreement, and there are a lot of major financial issues that need to be addressed that are going to be very painful discussions. So we just can't rush this and hope that it's going to pass because some miracle arrives. It's just politically not going to work.
I tend to agree, because I think that what I have observed is that there's almost a split among people in town. And initially, we heard so much talk about, let's have a New England biolabs type operation on the property. Let's have some type of commercial development. That will be a windfall for the town financially. Well, the consultants pretty much put the kibosh on that. I mean, they essentially indicated that any kind of significant commercial development on this site would be user-driven, which was really their way of saying that there's not likely to be a lot of interest among entities like New England Biolabs in this site. Not that it couldn't happen, but you wouldn't necessarily plan for it. So it was the residential development that was the focus of what the planning board did, but we did allow in the illustrative plans for congregate care type of operation, comparable in scale to Riverbend. So that was, you know, the commercial component of this. So there is that issue, because I know in speaking to people, they've said to me, well, we thought there would be commercial development on this site. Well, we can't rule it out, but we do know, as a practical matter, there's not going to be any demand for office space on that site. There's no demand for office space in the city of Boston, or really anywhere else. And so there are problems with what can go there. And so again, I think to Rick's point, I'm cautiously optimistic that we could get our work done in terms of a final bylaw, but whether we have time to actually sell it, and I can't answer that. Now, we've had 2 meetings in the memorial room that were really well attended. We had a questionnaire that we circulated to get impressions from people, but this is a process, as Rick says, is really important, because I think in this instance, there likely will be differences of opinions among townspeople, and we have yet to hear from the seminary. So the planning board has always tried to come up with an amalgam of scenarios that address the social needs, the environmental needs, and the fiscal needs of the town, those 3 things. And so we haven't looked at this as a financial windfall. We really want to look at it long-term, and whether or not that site can accommodate other aspects that would make it a important component of the town. And Browns Hill is the highest point in Essex County. And it's significant in that in terms of the view. So having public access is something that we always thought would be important. So yes, there's a lot here. And so yes, could we get our metrics put in here? Probably. But if the seminary has other really, if they tear into this overlay district and tear it to shreds such that we can't put the pieces together in any kind of meaningful way, then it really is DOA. And, you know, as I've said all along, there is nothing that would prevent the seminary from drafting its own overlay district under Massachusetts General Law 48, Section 5, and then submitting it to the planning board for a review and a recommendation. So, you know, if their predilection is to have some separate district for the dormitories, they can propose that. But I can't predict how the planning board would respond among all its members, but it would be something that we would have to vote on to see if we wanted to go forward crafting some kind of limited bylaw after we have gone through the exercise of doing a holistic version.
All right, great, thanks, Marty. You were saying, how can we help or guide the process, I think?
Yes.
So I think with the planning board members here, and the chair especially, I think the general feeling is that we continue on developing the overlay district, holistically.
Sounds like everybody wants to.
Right, rah-rah, let's go. And then the town meeting date, we're shooting for an October 19th, optimistically. Cautiously optimistically, having a bylaw in hand by the 19th.
You want to
Cautiously.
try to put it on the warrant.
It's already on the warrant.
It's already on the
Wanna try to
warrant.
we're reopening the warrant. I'm asking the question, y'all want to keep it on the warrant?
Well, I think we need to be this aggressive even for April.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean,
right.
and we're gonna have the same discussion in March.
No, but I'm asking if the idea is that you want to try to put it to a
I'm ready to
vote.
make that
I
call
wanna see what
today,
comes
but
back.
Yeah, but I want to
See
just
what-
keep working on it. I want to see what the
Yeah,
red line comments are.
I hesitate to make any major decisions until we get red line
comments,
back
yeah.
from the seminary, and the planning board has another stab at
Yeah.
looking at those red lines and continuing on with the process a little bit more.
I think that the planning board also wants to see the development agreement. we want to see the development agreement. It's as simple as that. I mean, this is what John Whitten said at the outset. They're belt and suspenders. So we're putting our work into it, but we need to see the work that the select board and the seminary can do with respect to addressing those components of this whole site that are not something that we can regulate in a bylaw. It has to be contractual. So really,
Let's just talk
the
about that
ball's
for a
in
second.
your court.
Let's just talk about that for a second, just to understand. One, contractually, what does a development agreement do contractually, Tom? Is it a binding contractual agreement, or
Oh,
is it like
yes.
an MOU?
No,
Okay, John Wooden question. Secondly,
I can answer that for you.
Secondly, what
It's
is the town gonna hear about the development agreement? Are we gonna present the development agreement at the town meeting? Or are we gonna present the bylaw at town meeting?
It'd be the bylaw.
Right, so
So,
I'm trying to understand
Mr.
how-
Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
if I could just add, so it's a really important question. So the development agreement, in my experience, would be drafted, it would be agreed upon, it wouldn't be executed, because the execution of the development agreement from the seminary's perspective would be contingent on the town meeting vote and then the Attorney General's subsequent approval. But if I were a voter at town meeting, I would want to know, based on my review of the bylaw, where the suspenders were, or where the belt was, so to speak, because the two really do get linked for a project like this, for a proposal like this. So the availability for the voters at the time of the bylaw discussion of the development agreement is going to be really, really important. And in a perfect world, Dr. Barnes stands up at town meeting and says, just like the select board chair, we've agreed in concept with this document, we've worked this out, it's all contingent on the town meeting vote, and if town meeting approves this and the AG approves it, we'll execute this document. So that kind of assurance is what town meeting voters typically want to hear. It's the bylaw which they can read, it's a regulatory document, it's enforced pursuant to the zoning act and the zoning bylaw, but the development agreement provides me assurance that contractually the seminary has agreed to do the following things. And it helps, in my experience, dramatically convince a voter who would otherwise be skeptical that in fact this is a real thing, it's actually happening. If I could just add one more thing, Mr. Chairman, it also takes a lot of pressure off the regulatory process. And I've shared with the planning board instances where a special permit requirement included the set aside of open space or public access. The appeals court has shot that down in certain instances, or other conditions of approval that in a judicial review would conclude that the planning board went too far. It exceeded its special permit authority. That problem is removed from the equation through a development agreement, because the regulatory powers have limitations in Massachusetts and most states. The planning board can only go so far, but a contract is very different. It's bargained for. Both parties are assumed to know what they're doing. So the town can get, as can the seminary, but my concern is the town can get far more benefit, far more favorable treatment through the development agreement process than it could with the zoning bylaw standing alone. The two really work well together.
So to your point, Bill, I think we would, to just reiterate, red line from the seminary, planning board more work on it, and then in the meantime, when we kind of see where that's going, then we look and fill those gaps with the development agreement.
Well, we can start that process now.
Yeah, why is the development
I
agreement
think you need
lacking
to
so
start the
much? I mean,
development
why is it
agreement
so far behind
yesterday.
us?
I mean, in some measure, it's not that far behind. We just haven't put a lot of what we've discussed onto paper yet. Sean and I have had a couple meetings with John and Marilyn and Ken and discussed the broad outlines of what would be in the development agreement, much of which is stuff that Marnie alluded to from the correspondence that she had sent us several months ago. We haven't put it in terms of, like, this is the agreement and it's articles A through K or A through Z, but that would be the next step. And there's largely agreement between us. There's probably one or two things that are going to be harder to discuss, and I think that's the negotiation comes around with what is exactly going to be the flexibility in the bylaw so that we know where we're trying to tie their hands on the other side of it. Sorry, and that's where we're trying to get to. The flexibility should be, shouldn't be given away. So that's where some of the harder conversations have to happen, so we need to know what are we negotiating for. Is that,
Yeah, I think so. That's a good summary.
Should we be pushing for a draft of that by the 19th as well, or?
I
Yeah,
would
we
push
could-
for it really
I think it would-
fast.
I don't think
I
that'll
think
be an
we could-
issue.
I don't think that, John is hired to draft it for us and then, send it to Myrwan and then we can ask for that to happen.
Then the tennis match begins. Do we need to discuss anything else about this at the moment? I
That's
don't.
how we can help.
I think
Do the
we-
development
How can we
agreement.
help? Development
Do the
agreement.
Development agreement.
We'll do that.
And go tour the property and figure out all these lines. that we draw.
That would be my other suggestion, as Marilyn alluded to, and I know that the seminary has reached out to the planning board numerous times to come and have either a subcommittee or a couple members come up and talk about the zoning of the property
Right, and
and the
we have,
areas.
I think that maybe Dr. Barnes forgets, but we did tour the property, and we've walked the property. And I think that someone with Jonathan Poor's experience in site design, he understands the contours of those properties, so.
Yeah,
if
I
you-
agree with that, Marnie, if I can cut you off here, because you've taken a lot of time up tonight. But I would say, I would encourage you strongly to send a subcommittee or a few members up there to just do it again. Because a lot has happened since that first visit that you and I were at, and that was almost a year ago now. And now there's been so much more development of the overlay district and the zoning. Just, even if you come to the same conclusion, at least you've extended that cooperative initiative a little bit more, and I think it will go a long way.
We can easily do that. But again, I mean, we have proceeded pretty much down a consistent path with respect to how the planning board has approached this site with respect to the different, we're calling them districts now instead of zones on the advice of John Whitten, but the different districts and how, with respect to the illustrative plans, they relate to one another to present really a cohesive kind of residential area as part of the campus, and also integrating reuse of the historic buildings. So,
But it sounds like, not to cut you off, but we need to move on. Sounds like they want you to do it, so it would probably be a good idea to do it again.
right, I
Okay,
understand
So
that.
why don't we just leave it at that, and why don't you schedule it to
Yeah.
visit, and we'll move on.
Yeah.
We gotta move on.
I agree, we gotta get moving.
John, I'll be in touch with you this week.
But it's been great discussion.
John, I'll be in touch with you this week to schedule a first draft of the development agreement that we can then meet with Marilyn and Kenna.
So we do have to talk about opening the warrant.
Yeah.
Oh, and Marnie needs to be part of that discussion too, so. Maybe.
Reopening the warrant for the
For-
stormwater
yes.
management?
Stormwater management.
Yes.
So I guess, thank you, Ken. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Ken, thank you, Myron.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Myron.
Don't you wish you were back?
Do we want to have the discussion and decision tonight, or can we wait on that? Do you think that it's a major difference if we open it tonight? And Joe, you can chime in on this too.
To me, I'd rather vote on it tonight while we're all here talking about it, because it's all doing is eliminating obstacles, but it's not guaranteeing it's going to be on there or going to pass. But it's us doing our part to eliminate obstacles they have to get it done. And so, for me, this is probably more important than seminary in terms of timing, because but, and it's probably they're closer to it.
Yeah.
So, but this is, it
Thoughts
was-
on this side of the table?
I agree. My only concern is like, we just talked about, I don't know whether the word was the optimism cautiously, but like, does this prevent,
Work on the
the
overlay.
overlay district? I mean, there's only so many people working towards October 19th, if you will. Does this send a message, drop the ball and go to this?
Sounds like it's Alex and Pat working on this, right? So it's a smaller group.
So
of-
it's
Yeah,
divide and conquer?
We
Yeah.
have to
right,
Then I would be for opening the warrant.
Yeah, and,
Just adjust some language.
right.
and
Okay.
the plan board.
I guess my question was, out of 100% done, you're at 97%. It's mostly kind of devil in the details, little things? Okay.
The plan board actually has the stormwater bylaw on their agenda for the meeting on Thursday.
On Thursday, right, where-
And they don't have anything on for the seminary at this point, so.
Do you think
within
you'll
48
vote on
hours-
it on Thursday, Marnie?
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll nail it all down. And as long as Alex Wishart is attending, which I hope he,
I believe he's available for Thursday. He wasn't available.
yeah, as long as he's there to help, resolve any outstanding issues, it's all but done.
Okay. I guess that was my just concern, how close we were to having the planning board make a vote on it.
Make motion, open the warrant.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? All those in favor?
What are we adding to it?
Are we opening a warrant first?
Stormwater.
First, we gotta open a warrant. and
We
then
gotta
can
open it
decide
first,
what
but then we gotta
Tom?
vote to add it on.
Town council has a question.
Thank you. So when I prepared the draft warrant, one of the potential articles that I included on there was what I thought was potentially a groundwater protection district bylaw. Is that what we're talking about here, is the stormwater
No,
bylaw?
this is
that
different.
Different?
Different.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, so back to our, we've got a motion, we've got second and clarification for Caroline. This is just to open the warrant. Then we'll discuss whether we add the stormwater bylaw to it. Right? So all those in favor of opening the warrant, say aye.
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 Warrant's open.
So the things we want to talk about on the warrant are whether we're going to keep the overlay district on the warrant and whether we're going to add the stormwater protection. Right, so
Right.
just make a motion for each one.
No, I thought we wanted to keep that on the overlay on the warrant and make a decision the day before.
I'm agreeing to that,
Okay.
but now that it's open, we can talk about it. But yes, I'm in agreement that, once again, keep it on, it's already on there, we can always table it if we don't feel like we're going to get to a point where we have,
Right.
it's going to be a positive thing.
So let's just keep it simple. Let's just start with, do we want to add the stormwater bylaw to the warrant?
Let's
If
make
the answer is
motion,
yes,
we can
somebody
talk
make a
to it.
motion.
I move that we add the stormwater management bylaw to the warrant for.
Not a bylaw, though.
It is a bylaw.
It is a
Just
bylaw.
a general bylaw,
It's a
not
general,
not
sorry,
planning
it's
board.
not a zoning bylaw.
General bylaw, okay.
Yeah.
You know I'm tentative about making these motions.
Yeah,
And you did that.
don't thwart her. She did a
Just
good
reading
job.
the agenda.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got a motion. Anybody want to second it?
Second.
Yeah,
Okay.
Bill Olson.
Tie for the bills. Any discussion on adding it?
No, I mean, I think my only thing, right, is I encourage it, I think it needs to be done. I think the only thing that happened last time when Bill Consensus that a bunch of developers found out at the last minute, we all got a bunch of phone calls. So I would just, to preempt that and to be proactive, let's involve local
Include
developers.
some
And
developers.
get them, so we just know what the argument is, just so we can be prepared for it. Not that I'm saying change the bylaw, but just so we could be educated and be able to, because
Right.
what you answered tonight, the questions you answered tonight, we're positive about. It's not gonna eliminate, it's not going to, it's more of a tool.
Yep.
It's a objective versus, it's a subjective versus tool. So I mean, all the things you said were the right things to say, so just wanna make sure we're consistent in our message, but, so that's my only sort of ask.
Yep.
That gets done.
I just think that, I agree that the public hearing, even though it's a general bylaw, and as
Okay.
Tom said, we really don't need the public hearing, that I would encourage strongly that the planning board still do a public hearing, at least one,
To get some comments.
and get some comments and reach out to a few developers
Nobody
like
came tonight
Tom
to
Ford or
speak
somebody else.
against
and-
it, and hopefully nobody does, but I just want to give people opportunity, if they have educated comments to make that will help inform us, it's always good to hear those comments.
Anything from this side?
I agree.
All right. All those in favor of adding that to the warrant, say aye.
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 Aye. All right, and then, I don't think we need to make a motion, but we can make another motion to close the warrant if we're fine with everything that's on it.
Anything else?
I would, clarifying question.
Yep.
You're suggesting we keep it on, and if we decide to table it, we table it on the floor?
Anytime between now and then, we
Any,
can do it.
you can make a motion to make, when you meet on the 16th, you'll probably finalize your recommendations for the warrant, and FinCom will do the same thing sometime that week. You can make a motion on the 16th that you're going to move no action so that the item gets tabled until the spring. If you don't think, on the 16th, if you don't think it's far enough along, and you want 3 more months to build consensus, or 6 more months to build consensus, you can table it by making a recommendation for no action at this time. And you could do it that,
My question is specifically, like, I don't want it printed in the warrant if we are not going to vote on it at the meeting.
can I make an argument against that? The
Yeah.
more
You may-
times-
Yeah.
The more times people see it, the more they'll have an opportunity to understand what's going on and get interested and ask questions. It's actually a good way to kind of get
My
people
challenge is
attention to
the
it.
counter to that, which is you have a strong, well-funded opposition already to this. And if there's any indication that it's going to be at town meeting and then it's pulled from town meeting, that's going to be a rash of shit I don't want to deal with.
You're talking about Browns Hill overlay,
Browns Hill overlay.
not the stormwater. just
Not
to
the
clarify.
stormwater. And so I just want to be careful that, like, I agree with what you're saying, absolutely, but that's what I don't want to deal with, is that it's there, we're acting like we're going to do something about it, it's coming, and then we either table it and get arrest you for that, or it creates undue stress before we actually get anywhere and puts more opinions and inputs to a process that is already very complicated for the planning board. I do not think we're going to take this to a vote in fall town meeting. And I would just be really cautious about us putting it in there and talking about it like we're going to, because from what I saw with the abutters, and they have every right to this way, this is not a comment, they are ready to defend against this.
It's better that we hear all that stuff now.
It's coming anyway.
Yeah, I'd rather hear it now and be part of the discussion, part of the process.
Okay.
There's always abutters, and they're always gonna have constructive criticism, and we always need to hear it and work in the thing. And if we wait, then we're just gonna kick the can down the road when the abutters have, so.
I just think there's a process for that that isn't using special town meeting as a method for that conversation. There's supposed to be a process whereby we do have that conversation. It seems like it creates the wrong tone, and it creates a frenzied conversation when we use special town meeting as a forum to start those conversations. I'm not gonna die on the hill, no pun intended. But it's just, I don't know. It seems, if we're not gonna vote on it, I just don't really want it anywhere near the warrant. But if y'all want it there, I'm gonna just direct people to y'all's email address.
Yeah, my history says it's better to put it on the warrant, and so it's talked about. But I hear what you're saying, I don't disagree with it, but I think it's worth getting it out there and working towards it with momentum and not killing the momentum on either side, right? Pros and cons, we want to hear it, because something's going to happen with that property. And as a town, we have to agree.
It's happening regardless.
As a town, we have to agree with what it is. It's not our decision, it's not planning board, it's the town has to agree with what it is, so it's always good to get.
I guess I'm more worried, like, if there's an idea that we're going to vote on it, and we decide at town meeting not to vote on it, and we have a huge group of people who have shown up to town meeting with big thoughts on it, that's what I want to avoid.
I agree
That
with
we're
you
being very clear.
I agree with you, we should not wait till the floor. We should.
But how, like, but what's the method for communication for saying to people, just kidding, it's in there, but we're not voting on it,
Well,
so don't show up?
So the warrant and the book of recommendations can say that on the meeting on the 16th, the select board voted to recommend no further action at this time.
Does it need some further?
When we go through our warrant hearing,
Right.
Yep.
at that point,
I'll
we
make
can,
recommendations on all the articles.
Okay.
And then that goes into the warrant book and tells people that we've decided that we need more time on this, and we're gonna basically ask you, take no action now so that we can take it up later when we're ready.
Tom, did you want to
Am I
add
wrong,
something to
Tom?
that?
Yes. No, that's 100% correct. The issue, however, is that somebody can still move it.
Right.
So the recommendation could be to, in this case, because it's a zoning bylaw, our typical recommendation is that you would refer it back to the planning board for further study, which avoids the potential 2-year
So could we do that on
ban
the
issue.
16th?
You can do that at town meeting. Well, if it's going to be on the warrant, then certainly that can be the main motion. However, if someone wanted to, that motion could get defeated, in which case somebody could then move the article as printed in the warrant to adopt the zoning bylaw, and whether it gets the requisite vote or not, it's a different story. But just because there's a recommendation to defer action or to table it, for lack of a better term, does not necessarily mean that that will actually happen.
Right.
It's never not happened, but I hear what you're saying.
We've
It is
never
a
had
risk,
it.
But we've tabled it multiple times, and things get tabled and they get moved to the next meeting. So we'll make that determination on the 19th.
October 16th.
And I hate to say it, because on the 16th, we could open the warrant again.
You can close it.
And
Take it out.
And take it out.
Yeah.
There's always that
You can
option.
always do that
We
too.
don't want to leave it open
Right.
till then, do we?
Right.
I mean, is
Well,
that-
I would rather not leave it open,
Then it
because then it opens up
It
other
opens up
things,
other
there's
things,
citizens
citizens
petitions and different
petitions.
timelines, so it's better to do what we did tonight, open it and close it right in our regular session like this. But we have that option if things have gone sideways.
We've
on the
not closed the
16th, well, no,
warrant yet.
because the 19th is only a few days away from that.
Could we use that opportunity at town meeting as a educational?
It is.
With
We've
all
done
the
that
people
before.
there,
Yep.
and it's
Yep,
on there?
for sure.
Done that
'Cause I think
before.
we need
We've
to-
done that, we've had like a
Right.
presentation before on something that isn't happening, but we just want to give an
We did it for
informal.
Browns, we did it for Browns Hill last
Did it for
meeting.
Brownsville last meeting.
Yeah.
Basically, same thing. Tom?
Just in terms of the timeline, so if special town meeting is scheduled for November 6th, so the warrant needs to be posted by the 23rd, 14 days prior. So How long, Joe, beforehand do you need to have the?
I've been telling everybody that to have their comments and recommendations and everything by the 19th, so that we can.
Get a few days and probably go to print the next day.
File it with the clerk and have it posted.
Okay, thank you.
I make a motion to close the warrant.
Yeah, I was just gonna do that.
Do you want to second it?
So I'll second it.
Okay. No discussion. All those who approve, say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. All right, we're getting through it.
Do we need to review the?
Let's just move, can we jump to that? It's 10 o'clock.
So we got a few things that are going to be pretty quick here, so I think we can just kind of barge through them. I'm going to ask the table one item, but in another one's just kind of checking a box for housekeeping from our last meeting, I think. But so review the draft FCM warrant with Councilor Tom McEnany. And Tom, if you just want to kind of give us a brief, since we're at this late hour, any issues or questions we need to answer for you tonight?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So I had prepared a draft version of the warrant, which I had provided to the town manager. I know it went out to the board members, I think, on Thursday or Friday last week. There are some numbers that I'll need to work with Joe on and the finance director to insert into the warrant. The only one that I really had a specific question on is there was a placeholder article that we had included to amend a groundwater protection, or to create perhaps it was maybe an overlay, I'm not even quite sure what it was, but there was a bylaw related to groundwater protection.
It's part of the Browns Hill.
It's a partner article to the Browns Hill Overlay District, because there is a groundwater protection overlay district there now, and the concern, and it was related to the well that was at the bottom of Browns Hill on Bridge Street, across from Bridge Street. And that well has been taken out of service, so there was some suggestion that removing the groundwater protection overlay district, there might be, might make it easier to develop the site because of the restrictions that the GPOD places on development.
Okay, so
Since we're no longer trying to protect a water source there.
okay, so then this article would be to amend, basically to delete that section of the bylaw, as opposed to creating a new
Yes.
bylaw?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of a removal, not an add.
Okay. I also included in there, I know, Mr. Chair, you were included on the correspondence with, regarding the senior tax deferral issue. So I included 2 warrant articles on there to address the concern. One was to increase the income gross receipt limitation beginning in fiscal '24, and that article also sets the interest rate at 2%, which was the amount that had been recommended. In addition to that, because the concern was that the $64,000, which is equal to the senior circuit breaker for a single head of household filer, which is the maximum that is currently allowed by statute, was low, and there was at least seemed to be a desire to raise it above that level to the level associated with the senior, with the circuit breaker for married filing jointly filers. So in order to do that, the towns that have adopted such a income limitation have adopted home rule petitions in order to do so. So I did include a warrant article to authorize the select board to pursue special legislation, as well as a draft special act, which will be included in the addendum. We heard some additional information on the septic loan program today, so I think I have an article drafted for that, which should hopefully be sufficient. I'll share it with the Board of Health Chair as well for his review, and ultimately, because it's technically a borrowing article, that we'll recommend that you have bond counsel review it, because I think there's specific language that they need in there for the Clean Water Trust. But other than that, the only question I really had was with respect to that groundwater protection district bylaw.
And are you good with numbers, or you still need numbers on certain things?
I think I'll still need some numbers on certain things, but I can work with Joe on those issues.
We could, Joe and I, Wendy and I can get those. And you have enough information to, you've got Alex works in your office, so you'll be able to draft the stormwater management amendment.
Right, yeah, in the bylaw, the actual warrant article will be pretty straightforward, and we'll include the amended bylaws as part of the appendix, so So I can draft the warrant article now pretty easily. We also, I'll need somebody to just review there's 2 CPC articles.
Yeah,
as
if you
well.
want to send them to me, or I can send them to Jay Butler, and we can figure it out.
Or you can send them to me and Sean, and between Sean and I, we'll make sure Jay has them.
Okay, thank you. And the article for the additional appropriation for the town hall project,
Is the second
just to
one,
make sure
right?
that that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Yep.
But it's, I think it's in pretty good shape.
Okay.
Yeah, I looked at it briefly last week, and great job, Tom. You got us started out in a good place. I'll send what we have. I think I already shared it with the FinCom chair. So
I think the only,
keep you in the loop, John, as we finish, as we fill in some of the other numbers and things but I think we're in pretty good shape there, minus the stormwater article.
I think on the cover page, Tom, I don't know if it was this version or the last one I looked at, there was something with the time in the auditorium and the date that was off, that didn't get carried over, but when I get the next kind of version of it, I can look at it.
Yeah, I think I might have corrected
You
that. I
might
think I had, the time might have been like 9 AM.
Yeah,
I
it
think I
was
switched
something
it to
that- yeah.
7 PM, right? It's just a
That was it.
carryover from the last version.
Also, Sean saying that sparked a memory in me. Town clerk had recently talked about being at a seminar about warrants, and actually your colleague Lauren spoke, and it recommended that on the warrant, printing the place need not be so specific. So if we just say that it's at the regional high school and give the address rather than cite the auditorium, because if, for instance, the auditorium floods and we have to move it to the gymnasium,
Then you're stuck.
then we're stuck. So maybe we could just be
A little more general.
a little more general, that it's going to be at that building, and then we can put it wherever in the building we need to, given weather circumstances.
Everybody
and
kind of
such.
knows where it is, too.
Sure, that's fine. I can take out auditorium.
Thank you.
All right, any questions for Tom while he's up there about the warrant?
It's good.
All right, thank you, Tom, for sticking
Okay.
through it.
I know, thank you. All right, have a good night.
Up next, we have discuss and vote on a request from Department of Public Works to use perpetual care funds for purchase of new overseer for Hamilton Cemetery. Why? Look who just showed up.
Oh, my gosh.
If that's not dedication, folks, I don't know what is.
I didn't want to skip this item because I knew poor Tim was out there in the hallway
I make a
forever.
motion to, I'll just make the motion to talk about it. I make a
If you want to make a motion to,
motion to approve the request from Department of Public Works to use perpetual care funds for purchase of a new overseer for Hamilton Cemetery.
Second.
okay, give us the 5,000-foot view of this.
5,000, it's an overseeder. We have
9,996
probably a 1983, maybe, overseeder. It's
Yeah.
on its last leg, according to our mechanic. In the Green Initiative, I did look for AV or EV alternatives.
Just isn't,
For a
right?
commercial overseeder, there is none at this time. That was the first thing I looked for, so.
And the only question I had for Joe, that he's already answered, but I'll just state it for the rest of the board, not to belabor our night here, but I asked if it had to be used just at the cemetery, because we're
Yeah,
buying it
that's
for the
my
cemetery,
question.
and the answer is no, we can use it wherever we need to.
Right, and we do have an overseeder for our parks and as part of the John Deere tractor. Obviously. we
It's a
can't use it.
larger one, right?
It's a larger
This is a
one,
smaller one.
It's too big to use at the cemetery.
Right.
We couldn't use it at the
Correct.
cemetery.
Right. So that's the issue why we need this other one. We can't use the one that we use in the parks and the cemetery because of the size.
It doesn't make any noise.
It's actually not that
Okay.
loud, no. It's
Doing
it's
the
kind of
holes,
like a
you know what I mean?
lawnmower, smaller engine.
Yeah.
Any
Just
further?
curious, not to put anyone on the spot, what's the balance in the fund and how does it grow?
It's about 300,000 or so in it.
Yeah, we're,
Last time I
we built it
remember.
up pretty
Okay.
good for these purchases as well as possibly some future
Expansion.
expansion.
Perfect.
People are dying to get in there.
Oh, but,
Sorry. There's a motion,
It's late, we'll give
a motion and a second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Thank
you,
you.
Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Tim, come in late tomorrow.
All right, no, I got a conference tomorrow, but maybe Thursday.
Oh, that's right. Oh, sure.
Thank you.
All right,
Tim.
up next, we have where are we here? Discuss and possible vote on town manager evaluation. This, I'm going to ask Caroline to use her favorite word today.
I would like to table this.
And this is because from Caroline, I got the compiled version of it on Wednesday, and I didn't go through it until Thursday, and then it was the weekend, and I felt that giving somebody, and us, mainly Joe, an evaluation like a day or two before we discuss it wasn't quite the proper thing to do. So we'll
And
take it
I-
up next meeting with all of our
And
recommendations and et
just
cetera.
and just for the people not throw things at me, but is it worth maybe a separate, shorter meeting just dedicated just to this, so it doesn't get lost in a, this seems to have gotten lost in a lot of meetings because we have a lot of important stuff to discuss, but this is
Yeah.
important for Joe and his
Yeah.
development, so is it worth an hour of people's times? Maybe we did a separate meeting another time to just.
I mean, we could. Let's, I don't know who I set the agenda with next.
Yeah, you guys, whoever that is, decide.
I did
on that.
last
I
time,
agree with
so-
you, but.
Yeah, you
So
did
what
it
what
last
is like?
time. Caroline did
like-
it before, so it's either Bill or Tom, and we can discuss and see what the agenda looks like coming
Who's
up
Tom?
and see if it's.
So when will we get the, or maybe I just ain't got it, because I wasn't here, through the year we're reviewing, but I'd like to see the aggregate.
You'll get it in the next probably
Okay.
2 days.
All right.
So you'll have plenty of time to
And
look
is
at
it
it.
like, he gets a chance to go through it, right?
Exactly. So he's going to get the compiled version that's all the scoring and the comments, and then any recommendations that I give, and then we discuss it as a board and see if there's more recommendations we want to do or whatnot, and we give him an attaboy or tell him to tighten up his act, or a combination of the two, and move on with their lives.
So I'd make sure we either fit it in, or I would agree to an hour sometime.
Yeah. I think
Because it always
that's-
seems to be at the end of the meeting, and then we never,
Right.
and we're out of energy by, I'm
Right.
completely toast right now,
Yeah.
so.
Just really quick to add to that, since Bill has indicated that, Bill Wilson has indicated he's not likely to be at the next meeting because
Right.
of conflict.
Right.
And I would love to have the benefit of the whole board there if possible, so I may be asking you to have an extra meeting, sorry.
I think that's reasonable.
Do it ahead of next Friday or after. I'm away for a bit. 2 weeks.
Just shoot me a text or an email, and let me know when you're gone,
Okay.
and we'll figure it out
Alright,
from there.
done.
Okay. Up next, discuss and vote on proposed IMA for shared conservation agent. This one I think is kind of an easy one, hopefully. You guys talked about it last meeting when I wasn't here. I've looked at it. The main question, I think, for Michelle or whoever was here that night was who's the lead on it, and the lead is us. So it
Hamilton is
was
us.
correct.
Us, it's gonna be us.
They've decided not to be the lead on it because
Which
we're
is
so
our-
awesome,
Which we prefer, right?
which we
We do.
prefer anyway.
We do.
And I can't remember, there was maybe another question or two, but I think Michelle answered most
She
of them.
did. One
right?
was like, we look for opportunities with Wenham and everything. I think she tried that, and the person there,
The person there does not want to.
They don't wanna play.
They're happy being a part-time, and they don't want to be full-time, so.
Okay.
That was my first thought.
Yep.
And I will let you know that the IMA is actually before the Manchester Board tonight as well. So it'll be,
I make a motion to approve the IMA for shared conservation with Manchester.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, aye. And
can
then-
I ask also for the board to take a vote to authorize Sean to sign? Because
Oh, yeah.
the way
So
this
that way
one's
we
set
don't
up
have to
is
all
for
sign
just, so you don't all have to sign it. Sean and I can sign it and get the finance director to
Make a
signature.
motion to have Sean work with Joe on the appropriate signatures and approvals.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All right. And then we have review and discuss plans and schedule for moving town hall operations to Patton Homestead. Do you want to talk about that tonight?
No.
Okay,
I'd like to
Fridays.
table this.
Friday,
sounds good.
Fridays.
Any new business? I know we didn't do selectmen reports
Hey,
or town manager
I have
reports.
I have a
but-
public service announcement
Tell us.
I'd like to share with whoever's still listening, but we talked about like septic systems, and we talked about water lines here, we talked about
Yep.
septic systems here.
A lot of water.
What I also want to mention, just through recent experiences, that most of us see with oil in our house, your oil tank should not last more than 25 years, so you should make sure that you replace your oil tank no less than every 25 years.
Yep.
And you should get it inspected, and you should check with your insurance company to make sure you are covered, because a lot of typical home insurances
Don't cover a spill or
don't
leak.
cover oil damage. So just a public service, as we're talking about water and septic, also your oil system.
Any other?
One thing I've, brought up a few times, and I know we're waiting, the school building committee is now officially the Cutler School Building Committee. I think I read in the report. I think really we need to get ahead on what we want to
Right.
happen on that property as well. So on a future agenda.
I agree. Joe, do you have anything from town manager report you want to highlight?
The fall festival is not this weekend, but next weekend.
It's
Right.
17th.
It's the
I
17th.
don't have it in there this week, huh?
No. I'm just saying,
I have a
just
note,
won't have a
I have a
meeting.
note from Scott on it. I mean,
Just to pick up on what Bill just said, the full Cutler School Building Committee met on Monday night, August 28th, at 6:30 to agree on the contract for the selection of architect. JCJ Architects was chosen by the subcommittee and approved by the MSBA. So we have approved the contract with JCJ to be the designer on the school building project. And we're going to be working with Superintendent Tracy to provide, thorough communications to everybody as the project moves on from here. That's the biggest takeaway in my time report this week.
All right.
Hopefully to have a lot more to talk about soon, but.
All right.
And
Pending.
the Fall Festival is the 17th.
Is the
from noon to
17th, right.
5.
All right. Any other new business or anything else?
That's it.
I would move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Ayes have it. Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
iPad 2, for joining us.
Before you.
Thank
all
you,
leave-
John, for joining us.
Thank you, John.
John Hancock's?
Yeah, John Hancock's tonight.
Yeah, just a couple things here. This you approved was the,
Your lovely,
It's an off-brand Muji, but it's still pretty good.
this,
It gave him some life out there tonight.
You were
was like a battery.
zesty. Yeah, you were zesty.
last
It was
meeting,
all good input, by the way. I was.
sorry.